Funding for Shaperillis is provided by
Surfshark VPN. Tune until the end to find out about their exclusive, incredible holiday season deal. About a year ago, I watched The Fabelmans, a semi-autobiographical account of the childhood of Steven Spielberg, and it got me so fascinated in this guy and his work. Like, don't get me wrong, I had seen and really enjoyed a ton of his films prior to watching this one, and I'm sure 95% of you have at least seen one of his movies. He's the highest grossing filmmaker in all of Hollywood, producing popular blockbuster after popular blockbuster, while also sprinkling in a ton of more mature, grounded, and adult movies into his filmography. I've always been rather amazed by his career, because while most famous directors tend to have a distinct style of filmmaking that they don't veer too far from, it kinda seems like Steven Spielberg can just do anything. He can tackle any genre of film he wants, and the main thing tying his filmography together is the fact that his movies are just really damn good. For the most part, he's made 34 feature films, and not all of them are winners. Mainly because he usually doesn't write the scripts for the movies he directs. So sometimes, the quality of the film is at the mercy of the screenwriter. And a lot of scripts he tackles don't quite live up to his filmmaking pedigree. But for the most part, the movies this guy makes are magical and inspiring, leaving children and adults alike completely in awe. I've always admired Spielberg and adored so many of the movies I saw from him. But it wasn't until watching The Fabelmans when I became so fixated on the idea that I had to see his entire filmography. I needed to witness the full picture of this legendary career that this movie served as a teaser for. So, when I talked about The Fabelmans in my Best Movies of 2022 video, I brought up the idea of ranking Spielberg's entire filmography to see what kind of reaction I'd get. And the reaction ended up being overwhelmingly positive. You guys seem really excited for this one. And the further I got into watching Spielberg's filmography, the more excited I got myself. There are so many movies in this ranking that I've been dying to talk to you guys about, either because I just discovered them, or because they've been inspirations for me since I was a child. This isn't the most consistent filmography I've ranked. Studio Ghibli and Wes Anderson both have a lot less stinkers. But man, is this perhaps the most thrilled I've ever been to make a ranking video. I can't wait to gush about the great pieces of art Steven Spielberg has given us, as well as bemoan some of the missteps he had every now and then throughout his long career. No more preamble, let's just dive right in. Disappointment in the game of life. So, what is the very worst Spielberg movie? Ready Player One? No. Jurassic Park The Lost World? Try again. Oh, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? Worse than that! Allow me to introduce you guys to a Spielberg film no one talks about. His least viewed feature-length film on Letterboxd, in fact. One that was so bad and so much harder to get through than anything I've ever watched for one of these ranking videos, that I committed what some of you might consider to be a cardinal movie watching sin. 1941 is an infamously bad Spielberg movie that is somehow better than this one I have ranked in the bottom slot on this list. Say hello to the BFG, since he's really friendly and he likes it when people say hello to him. Also, his movie is later in the list. Okay, I've stalled for long enough. It's time to tell you what the worst Spielberg movie is. But first, let me set the scene. Friday, August 25th. I wake up at 11 a.m., eat some delicious pancakes for breakfast, and tell myself, okay, before I put the finishing touches on my Puss in Boots The Last Wish analysis, why don't I watch another Spielberg movie for the ranking? I browse the list of movies I haven't yet watched, and I innocently decide to knock out a movie I don't know anything about. But it's only 2 hours apparently, so I figure, why not? This should be fine. I go to YouTube, and I rent a digital copy of Always. And that's how it ruins my entire day. I cannot stress enough how horrible the experience of watching this movie is. See, There's movies I hate more. At least 5 of the Sony ranking movies are worse. However, those movies weren't 2 hours with the most banal characters acting out the most insane premise with the most baffling execution imaginable. Wow, you might be thinking, the way you describe this, it sounds like a hilariously bad movie for the ages. No, it's not. Don't be fooled into watching this fucking monstrosity. It somehow manages to take a premise that sounds insane and makes it incredibly dull and lifeless. Somehow, the movie becomes more boring after its ridiculous twist. Which, hey, why don't we talk about it? So Richard Dreyfuss plays a pilot and puts out fires. He's in love with Holly Hunter and they have no chemistry. His friend is John Goodman, who tries his best to make this character memorable and likable. He doesn't really succeed. Anyway, Elastigirl is like, come on, Richard Dreyfuss, you gotta retire and hang up the plane and just stop. So the guy from Jaws is like, okay, sweetie, I'm just gonna do this one last job and then I'll go retire and teach people how to plane. They even have a cute little goodbye scene where she stops him from taking off and they kiss. How nice. Do you think he's going to die? Is it too subtle for you to realize that he's about to die on this mission? How much more fucking obvious can we make it that he's about to die? Oh, look at that, he's dead. So from this point on, the movie becomes a more mature and interesting story about grief and coping with it. We get to see Holly Hunter and John Goodman going through the stages of it, and eventually learning to accept that this guy they cared so much about is gone. Well, that sounds like a nice movie, I guess. Why didn't it turn out so good? Oh, because I fucking lied. That's not what the movie is about. There are glimpses of these characters dealing with grief, but they're not the focus. The focus is on the guy who died, because now he gets to come back as a ghost and manipulate the thoughts and actions of this new pilot as a spirit guide. He learns all this from Audrey Hepburn as she gives him a haircut in the middle of this scorched forest. And he's so casual about all this. Oh, yep, I'm dead. Oh well, sure, I'll be a spirit guide, why not? I'm sorry, what? Who the f reacts to this information so casually? From there, the rest of the movie is about this ghost guy watching himself get cucked as the new pilot he's supposed to guide falls in love with his old girlfriend. This is maybe the dumbest plot to a movie of all time, and the worst part is that it's all played completely serious. I couldn't believe what I was watching. How is this a real movie directed by Steven Spielberg? This is like a bad concept by M. Night Shyamalan standards. I'd rather be watching the movie about the beach that makes you old. At least that's probably a little bit funny and not the most boring thing I've ever seen in my life. Seriously, the movie was dull before, but it somehow gets more boring once it goes in this insane direction. I couldn't stand it. I felt like I was losing my mind as the ghost guy said some variation of, "That's my girl," for the 20th fucking time. Once I hit the hour mark, I knew I legitimately couldn't go on like this. I needed a palate cleanser after enduring only the first half of this movie. So I did something I've never done before when working on any of these ranking videos. I paused the movie I was watching and I threw on a completely different one. I figured The Adventures of Tintin looked fun, and yeah, I got more enjoyment out of the opening credits animation than I did the entire first hour of Always. What a great movie to wake me up out of my damn coma. The only bad thing was, as soon as it was over, I remembered, oh yeah, I still have an hour of this shit to go. So I watched the second hour and, I don't know, it was still bad, but the fire effects were cool. There was one good scene in a vacuum where the guy finally accepts that his girl has to move on, and he tells her all the things he wanted to tell her when he was alive. Too bad the movie surrounding this scene was so shitty, huh? Otherwise, I might have actually felt something. And then that's it. It was a whole lot of fucking nothing that added no value to my life whatsoever. Again, don't watch it out of morbid curiosity to see how bad it is, because its biggest crime is that it's painfully boring. I guess the fact that it manages to be so boring while having this insane of a premise is a feat in and of itself. But again, take my word for it, you don't need to watch this shitty ass, creepy as hell, big budget Hallmark movie. How did this come out the same year as Last Crusade? What kind of Shrek 2 Shark Tale double feature shit is this? The good news is, this movie has no fans, so no one will get mad at me for this placement. What a relief. I'll always remember to never watch this movie again.
The man slept through Pearl Harbor, for heaven's sakes. I sounded the alarm as soon as I could.
1941 is the most infamous Spielberg movie. That is, It was. I bet most people today haven't even heard of this movie, but back in the day, it was a pretty early blight on an otherwise promising career. This was essentially supposed to be his Dr. Strangelove, a farcical comedic take on a dramatic historical event, this one being the aftermath of Pearl Harbor instead of the Cold War. That's all well and good, but there's just one problem. You forgot the funny! I am not exaggerating when I tell you I did not laugh once throughout this movie. Hell, I didn't even smile once. It is a void where comedy goes to die. The story sucks. The characters are simultaneously annoying and completely forgettable. It's meant to satirize the absurd paranoia Americans felt right after Pearl Harbor, but it doesn't say anything other than, boy, those Americans sure were kooky, huh? And the kookiness is just so lamely written with such poor comedic timing. Wacky things just happen in this movie non-stop with no rhyme or reason. It's impossible to invest yourself in anything going on. And as a result, this is one of the most boring and least substantive films I've seen in quite a while. And even though the comedic timing isn't great, I think the direction isn't nearly as much to blame as the writing. Which is baffling, because this was written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the duo who wrote the Back to the Future trilogy. They know how to be funny! And this was long before Robert Zemeckis went off the deep end as a filmmaker. So like, how did this happen? The only real redeeming parts are some of the effects looking pretty impressive for the time. This was Spielberg's first big budget movie, and it's pretty cool to see him playing around with some big ass toys. Like at the end, this house falls over, and it's just like, damn, that's a satisfying housebreaking scene. It's got some cool visuals, but like, this doesn't even crack the top 10 of the most impressive visuals in a Spielberg movie. Literally his very next film after this was Raiders of the Lost Ark. So like, how can you possibly justify checking out this boring, obnoxious slog unless you're doing a ranking of all these movies? Simple. You can't. Don't watch this movie ever. Just watch Dr. Strangelove and forget this piece of shit happened. I definitely will as soon as this ranking is over.
You're a big guy. For you.
The big f***ing giant is a waste of both my and Spielberg's time. There were multiple points where I had to ask myself, wait, why am I watching this garbage? And then I remembered, oh yeah, it's for the Spielberg ranking. I forgot. If I can't even pick out an ounce of this iconic filmmaker's personal stamp, that's not a good sign. I don't even know what I can really say. This is barely a movie. I never read the original book as a kid, but I get the sense it would have been better adapted as a 90-minute animated film. Why does this need to be live action? Aside from a couple cool visuals of the girl next to all these giant belongings, I got nothing out of this experience visually except for disgust at these ugly CGI abominations. And I guess there was a cute sequence involving dreams at this one tree, but again, it would have been better animated. Oh well, not only do the visuals not impress, but the story and characters are just The girl is kind of annoying, and while Mark Rylance's performance as this big f***ing giant is pretty likable, eventually I just couldn't stand his goofy-ass way of speaking and messing up words. Maybe it was more charming in a short book and not a 2-hour Hollywood movie. Meanwhile, nothing happens in the story. Oh no, the giants are mean to the BFG. Also, he's way smaller than them, so like, he's not even big by giant standards. The title is a ripoff.
You're a big fat phony!
Anyway, he drinks some magic potion that makes him fart, and then there's a giant that gets hit in the balls. Eventually they decide, you know who can fix this? The Queen of England. So they go visit her, and everyone at the palace drinks the fart potion, and then they all fart. Then she captures all the evil giants, and they don't put up a fight at all. They just get banished to an island after 5 minutes. And there you go, that was the climax. And now the girl lives at the Queen's palace, I think. Pretty sure this one lady adopted her, even though she's barely a character in this. Is this what qualifies as a movie? What a piece of shit. Spielberg could have been making anything else in 2016, and instead he wasted his time toiling away at the Disney factory and producing something weak, even by their incredibly low standards. Don't watch this if you're over the age of 7. You won't get anything out of it.
Are you referencing something? Like some kind of work of fiction that I'm unaware of?
Oh dear lord, where do I begin? Ready Player One is a movie I managed to avoid for 5 years. I heard all about its endless cavalcade of pop culture references. Actually, you know what? That's pretty much all I heard about it. And considering how I feel about Ralph Breaks the Internet, Space Jam 2, and the Emoji Movie, yeah, you can probably guess why I was pretty content with never watching this absolutely filthy looking film. I did actually write a 10-minute parody play about it in college, based on what little cursory knowledge I had about it. The play was recorded, and it's on YouTube somewhere. You can search for it if you want, and if you manage to find it, I'll give you the keys to the Oasis or whatever. But yeah, aside from that, I never had any encounter with Ready Player One again. Until this video. I mean, let's be fair, it is ranked 4th to last for a reason. The same reason Shark Tale is ranked 5th to last on my DreamWorks ranking. Sometimes a movie is so insanely bad in ways you've never seen before that you have a great time watching it. The ironic enjoyment levels I got out of this shitfest really saved it, and I enjoyed it more than 3 other Spielberg movies as a result. God, I can't believe I have to call this a Spielberg movie. Not so much because it doesn't feel like Spielberg made it, but because it doesn't even feel like a goddamn movie. My brain collapsed in on itself watching this garbage. All I could do was point at the screen and mockingly clap every time they made a pop culture reference. There must have been like, what, 50 of them in the first 10 minutes? I liked the Minecraft world part, but I didn't like how they didn't have the Minecraft later in the movie. Where did Minecraft Steve go? I wanted to see him in the final battle. This movie genuinely might have one of the worst screenplays I've ever seen in my entire life. They just keep referencing things. It never ends. The main guy is in love with a Twitch streamer and she just kind of instantly falls in love with him. Why are they a good pair? What about them is compatible? What even is the main guy's personality? I can't even tell. Are you seriously telling me that nobody ever thought to drive backwards on this course when it was clear driving forwards wasn't working? Director Krennic has all these resources and agents at his disposal. Why are none of them scouring the Halliday tapes to find clues on how to beat the challenges? Why aren't any normal ass people doing this? Why is this kid the only one on the planet who thinks to look in Halliday's security files? Oh no, the bad guys killed his mom's sister.
You killed my mom's sister.
If only there was an easier word for that. Also, wow, I'm so broken up about this character who had one scene and I didn't care for at all in that scene. How come every single one of the online friends this kid makes lives in the same area? What a wild damn coincidence that they all just happen to be in Ohio and not across the country or the world. Why do people just use their headsets in the streets? Shouldn't they do that at home? Won't they get hit by cars if they're playing a VR game right next to a street? Why is the opening race scene completely visually incoherent? Oh no, the girl is ugly. Don't look at her. She's so hideous because she has a scar on her face. Shut the fuck up. She looks fine. Oh goody, TJ Miller is in this just when I thought it couldn't get any better! Oh look, it's the Shining scene. That's pretty cool, right? People like this scene a lot. That must mean it's good. No, of course not! It's the same shit as the rest of the movie! It's just taking all these iconic elements from the original film and robbing them of their context and meaning. It's just jingling keys! The movie! Nothing about it looks cinematic. Everything looks like a cheap video game cutscene. Yeah, they're in a video game and has a reason to look that way, but having an excuse doesn't change the fact that 80% of the movie looks visually hideous. Even the real world scenes don't look great. There's a scene where Halliday's talking to Simon Pegg, and it looks like it was filmed for a shitty sitcom, not a $155 million movie. The only things I liked were Ben Mendelsohn. He usually gives a great performance, and it's no different here. He can somewhat salvage just about anything. And, I don't know. I mean, the concept's kind of fun. Scouring a man's life for clues that'll lead you to different challenges in this virtual world. I feel like this story outline had a lot of potential if the characters and script weren't so stupid, and if it didn't rely so heavily on pop culture references. This story, with actual new concepts and made-up brands, instead of an avalanche of never-ending real-world pop culture references, could actually be pretty neat. But that's not what we got. It's impossible to engross myself in any scene because my focus is always being driven away by, remember the chest burster? Remember the holy hand grenade? Tracer Overwatch! The Iron Giant! Back to the Future! To be fair, the movie does slow down with the references towards a lot of the middle parts, but at that point, the damage is kinda done. I have zero investment in anything going on anymore, because all I can do is cringe at the references, point and laugh at the awful visual effects, and find myself deeply unsatisfied with the characters and narrative. But I will give the movie this. It really is not boring. At least not until the final battle where I was ready for it to start wrapping up. Throughout most of it, however, I was having the time of my life enjoying this unprecedentedly shitty, artless, soulless dumpster fire. It was a much better viewing experience than the boring as sin unholy trinity of the BFG, 1941, and Always. So congrats to Ready Player One. Not getting last place is truly an achievement. Even though it's not my least favorite of his, I'd say this is without a doubt the most embarrassing thing Steven Spielberg's name has ever been attached to. I literally cannot imagine him directing the sequences in this film. There was not a single frame of this movie in which I thought to myself, yes, Steven Spielberg directed this. It is the antithesis of artful expression, and it is a blight against the art of filmmaking. But it was pretty funny how bad it was, and it had Ryu from Streets. Maybe if Ryu was in the BFG, I would have liked it better. Also, I can't be the only one who thought Spielberg should have referenced himself and had the final challenge on the Atari be playing the E.T. video game. That would have been so perfect. Mainly because all the E.T. Atari copies ended up in a landfill. And that's where Ready Player One belongs.
Know your fucking place, trash.
The dinosaurs will turn to dust.
Gotta say, there have been a shocking number of really bad movies I had to watch for this list. Shocking, I tell you. See, I was under the impression that this Steven Spielberg guy was a good filmmaker. Well, he is for sure, there's no doubt about that. But he has a tendency to go for quantity over quality sometimes. He doesn't slow down, nor does he usually write his own scripts, as I said at the beginning of the vid. So it's to be expected that some stinkers will slip through the cracks now and then. But there was one movie that shocked me more than any other with how bad it was. I couldn't believe Spielberg's name was attached to it at the point in time when it came out, considering how terrible it ended up being. Without further ado, The Lost World Jurassic Park. So why is this so shocking, you might be wondering? I feel like the general consensus is that Jurassic Park always should have been one movie, and that the terrible sequels never lived up to the original. Well, yeah, but most of those terrible sequels were done by inferior filmmakers. This was Spielberg following up his massive blockbuster hit a mere 4 years later and churning out something completely devoid of the style and substance of the original. I don't even know how that could have happened. Like, he only screwed up Indiana Jones when he tried making another one 20 years later. Here, he was in his prime. He made Saving Private Ryan the next year. How does a guy of his caliber make dinosaurs boring when he just made them cool 4 years ago? There isn't a single shot or moment in this film that inspires the same awe or terror as the original. It's so bizarrely static and underwhelming in terms of its direction. But let's be totally fair here. The main culprit of this film sucking so bad is the script. The nice thing about the original film is that apart from the kids, which is understandable, none of the main characters are stupid. Here, the main characters are stupid. I cannot think of a more butchered character from the original to the sequel than Wreck-It Ralph, but a close second is Dr. Ian Malcolm. I swear to God, this is not the same guy. He looks like Dr. Ian Malcolm, but suddenly he has no charisma, barely any wit. Just nothing about him that I enjoyed in the original, where he perfectly served as a charismatic side character. Centering the narrative around him this time means we gotta flesh him out and give him a girlfriend and an estranged daughter. Oh no, is he gonna fix his relationships with them? No, actually, because the movie forgets about those issues and never really resolves them. The daughter also serves no purpose to the plot until she randomly does gymnastics and drop kicks a raptor out a window. What? But the girlfriend in this is seriously the dumbest person alive. She says, guys, we're here to observe the dinosaurs, not interact. Even though like 2 minutes ago she was interacting with a stegosaurus. She sees an injured baby T-Rex and is like, oh yeah, let me abduct him back to our base camp so I can fix his leg. What could possibly go wrong? Oh wait, I'm sorry, I misremembered because this movie's so forgettable. The other guy in their group abducts the baby T-Rex and she's like, are you crazy? This is a bad idea. And then that's the end of her protesting. She just goes along with it. What the f is wrong with this movie? Then later, the T-Rex parents show up at their base. Oh wow, didn't expect that. And she's like, wait a minute, guys. They're not here to hunt. They're just looking for their baby. No shit! What a stunning revelation! Give this woman a medal. She earned it for that amazing deduction. So yeah, unlike the first movie where the characters didn't actively do stupid things to incur the T-Rex's attention, here I couldn't get invested in this scene and the danger they're in at all. Like, yeah, you guys asked for this. Boo-hoo. Then soon after, they're hanging from their deaths, and this guy's like, hey, I'm gonna go get rope. You guys want anything else? And they're all quipping, like, oh, give me a cheeseburger with an apple tart or something, I don't know. I can understand Malcolm quipping in this situation, but the other two? Really? How am I supposed to be invested in their safety if they're like, yeah, we're fine. Get us an apple turnover. Fuck you. This movie is genuinely so hateable and yet so boring at the same time. A truly winning combination. The only thing that somewhat saved it for me was the climax. The setup for it is the dumbest thing ever. Like, now we've got this new villain who's like, you know what the main problem with Jurassic Park was? It was the fact that people would have to fly all the way out to a remote island to see dinosaurs. I think the problem was that the dinosaurs escaped and ate people. Besides, people go on vacations to islands all the time, and I'm pretty sure they would do so in order to see actual dinosaurs. But sure, man, whatever you say. So he gets the truly ingenious idea to open a dinosaur theme park in San Diego.
San Diego!
I'm telling you, this could be the San Diego Zoo. I would like to ask you to rack your brain and try to come up with a single possible reason why bringing a T-Rex to San Diego is the dumbest decision anyone could make of all time. Because I'll be honest, I couldn't think of a reason. That sounds like an amazing idea, and there is no possible way that this could go wrong. What? It went wrong? I'm flabbergasted! How can this be? So yeah, this guy is the dumbest person to ever live, but it's kind of fun seeing a T-Rex destroy San Diego. In fact, if you want to watch this movie, don't. Just skip to the ending, because it's kind of fun. And it's the only thing in the movie that's kind of fun. Everything else about this film is dog shit, and inferior to the original in every possible way. The action set pieces, the direction, the writing, the score, the performances, even the sound design. Like, the dinosaur roar sounds so generic in this one, to the point where I'm pretty sure they repurposed that Stegosaurus roar for one of the beasts in Attack of the Clones. It's not a good sign if your movie is making me think about Attack of the Clones in any way. The only thing that's slightly improved from the original is the effects, I guess. There are a couple iffy CGI shots in the first one, and I couldn't think of any here. But the first one also has so many impressive effects, and part of what made them impressive was seeing them for the first time. Here, we've seen all this shit already. It doesn't wow us. The ending is kind of fun, like I said, but otherwise, there's no reason to watch this. It doesn't even have a CGI velociraptor saying Alan. What are we even doing here, Steven, my guy? I think we can all agree that it's time for this franchise to go extinct. Do you get it? Do you see what I did there? It's like
normal words, but a horse guy.
Let me tell you, out of all the movies for this ranking that I hadn't seen before, there were none I was dreading watching quite like War Horse. I thought it was gonna be the corniest, schmaltziest, dullest affair in Spielberg's entire filmography. And let me tell you, I really wasn't that far off. It's not always bad, but it is pretty damn bad. I think the central conceit of the movie just doesn't work for me. Like, all of it is supposed to hinge on the relationship between this boy and this horse. We get a painstakingly long 45-minute prelude that feels like an entirely different movie from the war stuff, where we're supposed to be enamored by this horse and the bond he forms with this kid. But I'm sorry, I just didn't feel anything. Maybe this is just a me problem, but like, it's a horse! It can't really express much emotion through its face or body language. If this was a dog or cat, I'd probably feel that connection. But like, this kid is throwing all of his emotions at an animal that can't emote back whatsoever. And I don't really care about the kid either, because what do we really know about him other than he likes the horse? He has no characteristics outside of that. So anyway, the kid really wants the horse to plow the field and prove that comically unsubtle evil landlord wrong. The whole town comes to watch and see if the horse can do it for some reason. And then he does it, and the music swells, and it's this big triumphant moment. And I'm sorry, this is one of the most artificial feeling movies I've ever seen. Not in terms of its production design, it's got good sets and the cinematography is solid. But in terms of the story, it's just so basic and cheesy and emotionally manipulative. And it really doesn't doesn't mesh at all with the war portion of the film. Eventually, the dad sells the horse to Loki, and the kid's like, "Don't worry, horsey, I'll enlist in World War I so I can find you again." Like, huh? It really trivializes such a horrific historical event. Like, the war in this movie only exists as an obstacle, preventing this boy and this horsey from reuniting. The movie has nothing to say about war itself. It's just a feel-good story that happens to take place amidst one of the deadliest wars in history. Now, Spielberg famously has another war movie that you could argue does something similar, taking a horrific bloody conflict and using it as a backdrop for the mission of saving one guy. But A, that was a guy, not a horse. And B, that movie showed that war was fucking hell! It was gruesome, it was dramatic, it was intense. The depiction of war in War Horse is among the most sanitized and sterile I've ever seen on film. It's so unbelievably dull considering we know what Spielberg is capable of when it comes to depicting war. There were only a few scenes I really enjoyed, like when the horse is running through the battlefield, or when this little German girl finds him and forms a more genuine feeling, emotional connection to him than the main boy ever did. But aside from that, it was agonizingly boring and juvenile. This is like Baby's first war film, and as someone who's talked about not being a fan of Oscar-nominated war films before, I'd like to formally apologize to the recent All Quiet on the Western Front remake, because it was a hell of a lot more potent than this. War Horse feels like a movie scientifically bred in a lab to win an Oscar. The Academy loves war movies, and they love feel-good schmaltz, so why not throw them together? And even though it didn't win any Oscars, it still got a Best Picture nomination. But like, look at its other noms. These are all worthy enough categories for it to be up for, but notice how there's no Best Director nomination, no Screenplay nom, no Acting noms, and no Editing nom. Those are kind of the most important aspects of a movie, and if none of those are getting recognized in their respective categories, then how the f*** is it worthy of being one of the nominees for Best Picture? Again, because it was bred in a lab to be so. I'm sorry, I just have so much beef with this film. Probably more than any other person on the planet. It just represents everything I hate in a quote-unquote prestigious drama. And it offers nothing unique or special compared to the rest of Spielberg's filmography. Maybe if you can get more emotionally invested in a live-action horse's face than I can, then by all means, check it out. I'm never going to again.
Last year, Abe said he was 15 years old. Now he claims to be 16. Which is it, Abe?
Is anyone gonna get mad at me for saying Lincoln was boring? Anyone? I feel like this movie kind of came and went and no one has talked about it since the 2012 Oscar season. With that said, I have somehow watched this entire movie 4 different times. I don't even like it and I've seen it 4 times. How is that possible, you ask? Well, let me tell you. The first time was in 2013, shortly after Oscar season wrapped up, since it won a couple of those and I was curious about it. I didn't like it, but I was also 15, so I figured it was a good movie, just not for me. The next time I saw it was 2015, since it was playing in my AP history class. Probably the environment it was designed for, TBH. I also found it boring there, and so did the rest of the class. You'd think graduating high school would put an end to Lincoln in my life. But no, 2018. I joined a film watching club in college, and for some ungodly reason, this was the movie they put on one week. I don't even know who suggested it, but by the end, nobody seemed to have enjoyed it. I didn't want to get up and leave in the middle. I figured, okay, I'm an adult now. I'll try and get into this movie finally. And it just didn't happen. I'm sorry. And now we finally come to my 4th viewing of it for this dumbass video. And nothing has changed since I was 15. I just can't stand it. It is so dry and repetitive and unremarkable. Yes, Daniel Day-Lewis gives an excellent performance, and the best parts of the movie are just when he monologues. I also think Tommy Lee Jones did a great job, and Sally Field is excellent in her 2 scenes. But aside from the performances of these great actors, it's just dull and monotonous. I think my biggest issue with the film is that despite what the title would make you believe, it's not really a movie about Lincoln. It's about the ratifying of the 13th Amendment, and Lincoln happens to be a character in it. He doesn't even feel like the main character half the time. Instead of delving into the personal turmoil of him and his wife, grieving their son but trying to keep it together for the good of the nation, which are some of the best and most engaging scenes in the film, most of it is just, oh, we need to get the votes to pass this amendment. Let's talk to this person. Okay, let's talk to this other person now. Okay, let's talk to this other person. Okay, it's so tedious. And I'm not even opposed to movies and shows that are just talking to people and getting votes. I mean, Succession is one of my top 10 favorite shows of all time. And some of the most tense scenes in that show are board meeting votes. Or to use a cinematic example, 12 Angry Men is one of the most engaging films I've ever seen in my life. One location, a bunch of dudes talking and voting on a man's fate. That's it. That's the whole movie. But the performances and the script and the direction and the editing leave you on the edge of your seat. It's incredible. This feels like a grandpa made it. I just don't get much out of the direction here. And the script barely centers on Lincoln himself. My friend came in halfway through and asked how far back in Lincoln's life the movie started. And I told him, oh, 4 months before he dies. He was so confused. But again, it's indicative of how the movie probably shouldn't even have been called Lincoln. Don't get me wrong, the passing of the 13th Amendment is an incredibly important moment in history, and definitely movie-worthy. But again, it gets pretty repetitive watching a bunch of white dudes go around to collect the votes they need, while barely showing any black characters throughout its 2.5-hour runtime. Like, they're in it, but very sparingly, and considering this amendment was, about them, it might have been nice to see them more often. Also, the ending is really funny, because Lincoln's about to go to the theater, and he's all like, well, I gotta leave. Though I would much prefer to stay. Get it? It's like a metaphor. I don't know, it felt very corny. Not as corny as a certain scene in The Post, but still pretty goofy. Aside from the main performances, my favorite part of the movie was just picking out random actors I knew. Like, hey, that's Gale from Breaking Bad. That's the priest teacher guy from Lady Bird. That's holy fucking shit, Jeremy Strong? Our Lord and Savior Kendall Roy is in this? L to the OG. Dude be the OG. Okay, I changed my mind. This is my favorite Spielberg movie because none of the others have Kendall Roy in them. With that said, watching this 4 times is enough for one lifetime. Thank you, Kendall, for mildly entertaining me every time you and your silly ass beard came on screen. You are enough.
I couldn't agree more, Tinky. Hook, line, and stinker.
Hook is one of the most likable and charming bad movies I've ever seen. The whole time I was watching it, I kept thinking, yeah, this isn't good, but like, come on, how are you gonna hate this movie? It's cute and fun. Yeah, the pacing is kinda awful and the story barely goes anywhere and some of the effects and editing choices aren't really that great. But come on, it's fun! So the premise is that Robin Williams plays Peter Pan, except he grew up and now Captain Hook wants revenge. So he kidnaps his kids and Peter Pan has to learn how to be Peter Pan again in order to get them back. It's a fine premise, and there are plenty of cool-looking practical sets and funny moments. Particularly a couple of gags where people get shot. Those made me laugh out loud. The performances are also great. Robin Williams is solid, but Dustin Hoffman and Bob Hoskins as Hook and Shmi really steal the show. It has a lot of likable elements, but I don't know, it's also just kinda meandering and dull after a while. The scenes with Robin Williams and the Lost Boys are fine, but kinda forgettable. And while the Hook scenes are better and frequently very funny, it's like, what, he's training Peter Pan's son to betray his father and be a pirate like him? I know the son has problems with his dad, but like, you kidnapped him. It doesn't feel like this brainwashing should work at all. And then it kinda half-heartedly does, but it's pretty easy to convince the son to turn back to his dad's side. I don't know, nothing about this story felt genuine or earned to me. Speaking of not feeling genuine or earned, there's this one edgy lost boy named Rufio, played by Dante Bosco.
Hello, Zuko here.
Even though I never saw this movie before now, I think I remember the Nostalgia Critic frequently making jokes about this character. I'm not gonna check to see what jokes they are though, because that would require watching Nostalgia Critic. So anyway, Rufio is the cool, edgy kid. But uh-oh, he gets stabbed by Captain Hook in the final battle, and then he dies. Like, he actually fucking dies. This isn't a fake out or anything. He doesn't come back, he's just dead. Captain Hook straight up murdered a child in this movie, which is so tonally off compared to the rest of it. Like, nothing about this movie is dark. Why does it have child murder in it? I also find it funny just how quickly it happens. Like, he's stabbed in the side and then he's just gone after like 20 seconds. I'm sorry, that did not look instantly fatal. Fucking middle school play ass death over here. And the way Robin Williams reacts to it is funny too. Why is there a random gust of wind? Why did he say Hook no? Shouldn't he say Rufio no? Usually when someone's about to die, you yell out the name of the person who's about to die. What a weird movie. I don't even know where to begin with the scene where Tinkerbell wishes to become human-sized so she can make out with Robin Williams even though he's married. Why is that in the movie? Tinkerbell also just didn't work for me, and I hate to say it, but I think that's because of the direction. I don't think she ever appears in any shot with another character unless she's in this glowing form. Whenever we see the human actress playing her, it just cuts to a shot of only her, and we have no frame of reference as to where she is within the larger scene. It's weird. I guess the technology for the effects to have her face appear on the tiny body wasn't really there yet. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, considering the flying scenes in this look kinda rough. But then again, I don't know, this is 1991, that doesn't seem that early. And this is Spielberg. Surely he could have found some sort of workaround to make the effects in this movie not look like ass a lot of the time. Also, the daughter serves no purpose since the focus is only on the son's relationship with his dad. The kids constantly call Robin Williams fat, even though he isn't. Like, huh? Apparently, George Lucas and Carrie Fisher have cameos as a couple making out on a bridge. And one of Hook's pirates is played by Jimmy Buffett? I think Peter and Hook could have resolved their differences if they had just gone on a road trip to every Margaritaville in the country. Anyway, I think I've talked about this one enough. It's not very good, but it's hella charming. It looks like everyone had fun making it. It has its moments. It does not deserve to be Spielberg's lowest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, how the hell are you guys still taking this website seriously? Come on. Cute movie that I had a good time with, even though it's not good.
He's gaining on you.
Shia LaBeouf.
I love Indiana Jones. Ever since I was a kid and I first unlocked him in LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, I've been obsessed with this whip-slinging badass. Patrick and I played the LEGO Indiana Jones duology so many times and got so invested in the series without seeing any of the films. Then we saw them and oh my god, why do we show these to kids again? Oh well, we loved these movies. Their sense of adventure, their incredible action set pieces, their kooky band of sidekicks. Just everything about them captivated our imagination. And the older I got, the more I appreciated the incredible filmmaking feats accomplished in these movies. All thanks to the legendary Steven Spielberg. I love these movies with all my heart, even though most of the movies in it aren't very good. I mean, I'm a Star Wars fan, so I'm used to that being the status for a Lucasfilm series I like. Again, it's like poetry, sort of, they rhyme. But yeah, this is a series where I and a lot of other fans really ride off those highs that the best movies give off. Because there are unfortunately a fair deal of stinkers in this 5-film saga. So I bet you're dying to know, what do I consider to be the worst Indiana Jones movie? Dial of Destiny, and it's not even close. I might make a separate video talking about why I feel that way, because the good news is, we don't need to talk about it in this video since Spielberg didn't direct it. Let's instead turn our attention to the worst Indiana Jones movie that came from him. And I'm gonna be totally honest, you guys, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is not that bad. Oh, it's bad, don't get me wrong. I don't necessarily think it was worth digging up this franchise's grave and trying to make another one of these work nearly 20 years after the original trilogy ended. Spielberg apparently didn't think so, but Ford and Lucas really wanted it, so he said, sure, what's the worst that can happen? Oh no. Well, this is as good a place as any to start defending this movie. Yeah, I do think the fridge scene is kind of absurd, but to be totally honest, the franchise lost all plausible believability after this. The fridge is fine compared to the raft. If you think the raft survival is more believable than the fridge survival, then I think your nostalgia goggles are too tight. You might want to get those checked. Or if you hate both of these stunts and think they're both absurd, that's completely understandable. Anyway, now that we've cleared the fridge hurdle, I'm gonna make a bold claim and say that this movie is pretty damn good for about 40 minutes. No, seriously. The first act of this movie is actually pretty strong and kinda lives up to the legacy of the original trilogy. It's got similar energy, similar action, similar humor. The opening scene at the warehouse is a strong hook for the story and a great way to reintroduce Indiana Jones. The fridge is dumb, yes, but the rest of the Nuketown scene is great, especially this image of Indy staring at a nuclear explosion. And yeah, I'll say it, I don't mind Shia LaBeouf in this movie. His character fits the time period, he's not annoying or anything. I actually really like his relationship and chemistry with Indy. And the movie peaks with the motorcycle chase sequence. It's got great action and it's a ton of fun. From the brawl at the diner, to the Marcus Brody statue's head falling off, to when Indy and Mutt slide through the library and a student just casually asks him a question. Like, that is classic, good old-fashioned, Spielbergian, Indiana Jonesian magic right there. This first act gets Indiana Jones right. And it's helped even more by the fact that I don't even think Harrison Ford is too old to effectively play the role. There's a couple cute little jokes about him not being as spry as he used to be, like the "damn, I thought that was closer" line. But despite all the fuss this movie's detractors make about how old as shit he looks, I don't think that comes across at all. I still think he brings a believable amount of energy and vigor to this role. So yeah, this sounds like the best case scenario for a belated Indiana Jones sequel, and I would highly recommend it. It makes for an excellent 40-minute short, and oh yeah, there's an entire hour and 20 minutes left. Okay, surely this won't be the most boring thing ever. It was the most boring thing ever. For how many people talk about this movie as if it's a world-class disaster, the truth is, it's just kinda dull. Sometimes you'll see some truly insane shit, like Shia LaBeouf swings on monkey vines and manages to catch up to a car, or the, interdimensional beings. Yeah, I'm only a half-hearted defender of this movie, but even I gotta draw the line of fucking aliens. It's less about me believing they could exist within the wacky world of Indiana Jones, and more so about the idea just being fucking stupid, I don't know. I mean, this movie functionally has the same climax as Raiders, where the villain gets their face melted off because they tried to bite off more than they could chew. But in Raiders, it was the awesome wrath of Old Testament God giving way to some gnarly practical effects. Here, it's a dopey CGI alien, and the villain's death is extremely underwhelming. Speaking of which, the villain is underwhelming. Cate Blanchett really sucks in this role. No wonder she had to get a job conducting a Monster Hunter concert. No one would hire her after this movie. Let's see. They bring Marion back, and it's nice to see her and all, but I feel like she serves zero purpose to this narrative, outside of telling Indy that Mutt is his son. A fine reveal, and him marrying Marion at the end is a fine conclusion for his character, but they only talk in like 3 scenes in this movie. Hell, once we find out Mutt is his son, the chemistry he had with Indy isn't really there anymore. He just kind of says, "Hey, Daddy-o," over and over, and Indy's like, "Grr, go to school." And it's like, why was their connection so much more interesting when they didn't know they were related? I'll tell you why, because the second half of this movie isn't character focused. It's plot focused. Some of the best parts of the previous Indiana Jones movies are the character bits. When Indy drinks the blood of Kali and becomes evil Indiana Jones, we're invested in the scene because of how horrified and heartbroken Short Round is. When Indy needs to retrieve the Grail, we're invested in the scene because his dad is dying. When the gang is after the Crystal Skull, who gives a shit? What character has any personal stake in this journey? What are the stakes in general? What is Lydia Tarr gonna do when she gets the skull? Turns out she would have just died anyway because her brain exploded. So what did Indy and the gang gain from this journey? There are no strong character moments in the second half of this movie, partially because there's just too damn many of them. And I don't care about any of them either. Mutt loses most of his personality. Marion is useless. I never got to know Ox since he lost his mind before the events of the movie and doesn't get it back until the very end. All that leaves is... oh god, I haven't even talked about Mac yet. What a horrible character. I don't know a single person who likes him. He's so annoying. Just this greedy asshole with no depth, whose gimmick of constantly switching sides is completely obnoxious, and who serves zero purpose after the opening scene. He should kill himself now. You know how Indy had that buddy at the beginning of Temple of Doom who just died right away? Yeah, that should have been what they did with Mac in this movie. So yeah, this movie takes a pretty steep nosedive into the side of a cliff, and I can't say I'm a big fan of it. Do I think it never should have existed? Well, no. Like I said, those opening 40 minutes are really solid, and I had a great time with them. And as bad as the rest of the movie got, part of me feels like it was all worth it for that very last shot, where we see Mutt at the wedding, about to put on the iconic fedora, before Indy grabs it out of his hand, proving once and for all that there's only one Indiana Jones. I think that was the perfect ending to the Indiana Jones series, regardless of how rough the rest of this movie was. So on the whole, I don't really hate Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I think think it's rather disappointing given Spielberg's pedigree. Like, it genuinely feels like he gave up after the first act. I still think parts of it are neat, damn it. If you think it's completely devoid of quality, I don't know what to tell you, man. It really isn't. A very valid movie to hate, but I think there's a little too much of that going around for this movie in particular.
Tonight on Nights.
The Sugarland Express is Spielberg's first ever theatrical film, as well as his first ever collaboration with John Williams. Right off the bat, you can see the technical mastery this dude had over the art of film from the very beginning. There are tons of distinct and excellent shots, as well as some solidly directed chase sequences. In fact, the whole movie's one big chase. This whole time, Spielberg's first theatrical film was essentially a Grand Theft Auto movie. Two young criminals in love kidnap a police officer and force him to drive them everywhere, all as they want to get their kid back after he's put in foster care. It definitely makes for an exciting and entertaining first 45 minutes or so, but eventually the premise kinda started to wear thin for me. We're stuck in this car for most of the movie, which would be fine if we were stuck with engaging characters, but I feel like these ones are just kinda underwritten and bland. I don't believe that either of our leads are criminals. The performances don't do a ton to convince me. And while it's cute how they actually start to bond with the cop they held hostage, I can't say it really amounts to much by the end. There's a handful of good scenes spread across the second half of the film, but I feel like this movie really could have used better written and better performed characters, or a more engaging chase with more set pieces and locations for it to really work. As is, it's okay. It's a neat novelty to see one of Spielberg's earliest films, and it's definitely well directed with great cinematography. But yeah, I think there's a reason nobody really talks about it these days. It's definitely not his best.
Slap my salami, the guy's a commie.
Bridge of Spies is decent. It's a nice historical drama your dad probably caught on a plane one time. I remember watching it when I was 17 in order to prep for the 2015 Oscar season, and I found it really boring then. This is a sharp contrast to today, where I only find half of it kinda boring. I was actually really into the first half, where Tom Hanks is forced to defend this Soviet spy in court. Just for show, really. Everyone around him wants to make sure it looks like American justice is fair, and that this guy got a fair trial, even though they all want him guilty in reality. But Tom Hanks gets really invested in him as a person, and defending him as a fellow human, regardless of national borders. I like these two together. They have great on-screen chemistry. I don't really know what it is about Mark Rylance's performance that deserved an Oscar, but hey, he wasn't bad. It's a really good, compelling legal drama. But then halfway through, we gotta send Tom Hanks over to Berlin to negotiate a prisoner exchange. And this is where the movie kinda loses me a bit. It's not bad, but it's not nearly as gripping in my opinion. Tom Hanks just meets with a bunch of people, and we see him keep insisting that he gets a 2-for-1 deal on this prisoner exchange, even though everyone's telling him not to. But he's just such a gosh darn great guy that he has to. It's pretty much exactly how he was defending the spy in the first half of the movie out of the goodness of his heart, even though everyone was telling him not to. Yeah, the second half felt a little repetitive to me, and I feel like we didn't really learn anything new about the central character in it. The prisoner exchange scene itself was good, and it's a nice looking movie with good production design. The only thing that really felt out of place visually was the scene of the American spy's plane going down. Like, that CG is rough, and contrasts so hard with the rest of the movie just being dudes talking in rooms. You really didn't need to show that. You could have just had a radio broadcast say he's been captured. But oh well. It's a decent movie, definitely worth a watch if you're interested in this period of history. But 2 watches is more than enough for me, I think. Amistad was almost a good movie for me. It's a hell of a lot better than Lincoln, mainly because it's a historical drama about slavery that prominently features slaves as characters, but not prominently enough as far as I'm concerned. I read some reviews on Letterboxd, and the general consensus, which I completely agree with, is that the movie peaked during the first 15 minutes. It excellently depicts the slaves brutally rising up against their oppressors and taking control of the ship they're on, and from there, they try and sail their way home. All the dialogue is untranslated, but we can easily pick up on the characters' intentions through body language. And this bit of the movie is pretty fantastic. I really like seeing these people take their freedom into their own hands. Then they come ashore to America, get captured, and now their freedom is entirely in the hands of the white people for the rest of the movie. Okay. I mean, for what the movie is, it's still interesting. I'm still invested in this court case and the fate of these people. And this is based on a true story, so you obviously can't deviate that much from it. But man, I wish we could have kept going in the direction those first 15 minutes implied. As is, only one of the slaves gets to be a major character who basically represents all of them. And his story is very well done, but he's got to share the spotlight with Matthew McConaughey lawyer and Anthony Hopkins as John Quincy Adams and Morgan Freeman as this free man helping with the case. I find his his inclusion odd because apparently this is a completely fictional character. He doesn't really add much to the film and feels more like its way of saying, look, it's not all white saviors fighting the free slaves. But I don't know, we already had this black interpreter who feels very important to the proceedings. Morgan Freeman's character is just there. You could have given him more to do or cut him out to focus more on the individual slaves. Another thing that didn't really work for me was John Williams' score. Like, this was an ultra rare L for him because there are a ton of scenes in this that would have felt so much more impactful without choirs aggressively singing and telling me how I should feel. But oh well, it was well acted, it was engaging. I thought it was a pretty good movie by the time the court case was won. On to the next movie. Wait, what do you mean there are 45 minutes left? How is that possible? Oh, they gotta take their case to the Supreme Court now. Oh, alright. I suppose they're saving their best and most tense and dramatic scenes for last. Nope. Anthony Hopkins monologues for a while and then that's it. They're free to go back home. What? Why is the movie so lopsided like this? Spending the majority of its runtime on how brutally difficult the first court case was, and then saying, oh, but the Supreme Court, they're pushovers. They won the case with them easily. John Quincy Adams doesn't even want to help them for the majority of the movie. And then they ask him again, and suddenly he's pretty convinced. It's so weird. Like, since you're taking historical liberties anyway, like inventing a Morgan Freeman OC, did you even need to show the Supreme Court stuff? It's a tumor on the plot of the movie, offering nothing in terms of compelling drama, and only really serving as an excuse for Anthony Hopkins to show that he's a great actor. Yeah, I've seen Silence of the Lambs, I know that already. Ultimately, it's an okay movie. If you're tired of white savior narratives, then you can probably just skip it, but as far as those narratives go, it's pretty decent and well made. Just probably turn it off after the first court case is finished. I think you might enjoy it more.
Dude, we're falling right out of the sky! We gotta drop the load!
Oh, Temple of Doom. This is the single most batshit insane film Spielberg has ever made. Nothing else is on its level. I'm just kinda stunned that it even exists at all. It leaves no lasting impact on its franchise, and its events are never mentioned in any of the following films. Actually, I think Dial of Destiny briefly references it, but that's not a real Indiana Jones movie. Hell, it's barely a movie. Regardless, this weird little chapter in Indiana Jones's story exists as the most love it or hate it thing to come out of this entire franchise. Hell, maybe even Spielberg's entire filmography. He's made plenty of divisive films before, but this is that one, man. That one that you either adore or you fucking despise. Me personally, I think there's kind of equal amounts of things I adore and things I despise, which means they balance each other out and make for a movie that I think is pretty okay. It's like teetering on the edge of good for me. But, man, some of the stuff in this movie is just not it. Obviously, it's racist. Like, I feel like even people who love this movie will concede that. It's blatantly obvious. We don't need to get into that. Let's talk about the other most glaring issue with the film. Everyone's favorite damsel, Willie Scott.
We're not sinking! We're crashing!
Holy fucking shit, she is the most annoying character in this entire franchise. And this is a franchise with... She literally only exists to be the love interest in this movie. She screams all the time, acts like a Karen, is never funny or likable, accomplishes nothing outside of being the only person available to disable the spike trap, and punching one dude in the minecart chase, and she has absolutely zero chemistry with Indy. Elsa had more chemistry with him, and that bitch was faking it. Here, I don't see a single reason these two have to be into each other, outside of them both being physically attractive, and the fact that this is a movie, so they gotta be a couple. If I had my way, they would have dished Willie in Shanghai. Indy in short rounds, that's all ya fucking needed. But instead, we have this dead weight dragging the movie down and adding nothing of value to it. I guess Spielberg and Lucas really wanted to give us the opposite of Marion, and it was good that they didn't just do the same thing again. But man, she needed something. Some sort of skill, some sort of reason to be here outside of comic relief. Marcus Brody was pretty much just comic relief in Last Crusade, but the difference is that he's actually funny and likable. Willie sucks and I hate her so much. Aside from that, the pacing in this movie is just kinda off. After the pretty good opening in Shanghai and the, quite frankly, fucking absurd and ridiculous raft escape sequence, seriously, they should all be dead. After After that, the pacing is quite glacial and the film takes a while to really go anywhere. The entire middle sequence from Indy and friends finding the village, up until he and Short Round get trapped in the spike room, it's not particularly interesting. See, normally this would be the part of the movie where Indy starts gathering clues and investigating where this artifact could be, all the while building mystery and suspense around the thing he's looking for. With this movie, they need to go find the sacred stones, so they go to this one palace. Then they stumble upon the thuggy death cult underground, and oh look, there's the stones. Found them. There's no mystery or discovery to be had, and that's one of the strongest parts of the other Indiana Jones films. Spielberg and Lucas really wanted to go with something completely different than Raiders here, and I can respect its ambition of just carrying over the title character and making an entirely different kind of adventure film with him, but like, I can simultaneously respect the fact that this film is different, and also dislike it for being different, because the other style of adventure he had in Raiders and Crusade is just way more compelling to me. Again, it's nice that this film exists, because it proves you can just take this character and stick him in any sort of adventure anytime, rather than just having him race against Nazis for a biblical artifact all the time. I do think the series has more value by having this movie in it, but it's nowhere close to the same level as Raiders or Crusade for me. Once the opening is over, it doesn't really find its footing again until about halfway through the movie. But with that said, obviously there's a lot of stuff I like about it. The second half is generally much better than the first. Once we've gotten past the racist, unfunny dinner scene, the disappointment that stems from a lack of discovery and archaeology, and about 80% of the unfunny Willy antics that the movie is kind of front-loaded with, we're left with a fucking descent into hell. Spielberg pulls out all the stops with the intensity and the frightening imagery here. Nothing quite tops the climax of Raiders in my opinion in terms of its terror, and yet there's just a lot more volume here. So much more horrific shit being thrown in your face that it's kind of insane. And with that heightened terror comes some of the best action to come out of the whole series. I love the minecart chase, the battle with the big guy in front of the steamroller, and that killer ending on the bridge. For all its shortcomings, the second half of the movie delivers on the quintessential, iconic Indiana Jones moments we all know and love. John Williams delivers what might be his best Indiana Jones score to date, heightening every action bit and horrific image with his killer music. I also love this scene, like it's so unnecessary but so funny. But none of these are my favorite aspect of the movie. The one thing that keeps me invested in the movie's first half and enhances the dramatic tension of the second half is Short Round. I absolutely love this kid. Hell, he might be my favorite sidekick Indy has ever had across the entire series. You know how I said the last shot of Crystal Skull proves that there's only one Indiana Jones? Well, I lied. If there's any character in this series who would make a worthy heir to the mantle, it's Short Round. Hell, he actually gets to wear the hat in one scene in this movie, so that's proof right there. In addition to being this super energetic and funny bright spot in a movie suffering from the charisma vacuum that is Willy, Short Round is also damn capable. Hell, if he didn't break out of his chains, which looked way too easy to do, but let's not worry about that. If he didn't break free and set Indy on fire, they all would have been screwed. He legitimately saved the day. And he did so again when he started punching the Maharaja to get the voodoo doll back that was causing Indy pain so he could fight the big guy. This is a weird movie. I like the scene where they're playing cards together and both cheating. I like the emotional moments they have together. And nothing with Short Round is cooler to me than the moment where, after he wakes Indy up from the evil juice by setting him on fire, Indy tells him, "I'm alright, kid." And then the two of them just start fighting the thuggies together. That moment really got to me. Like, it just feels right. He is the true heir apparent to the fedora. And this series really dropped the ball by never bringing him back at any point. Hell, everyone was so sure they were gonna do it in Dial of Destiny, considering Ke Huy Quan is bigger than ever now. But nope. Unlike Willy, this is a character I'm so upset that we never saw again. Especially since Willy's existence kind of robs Indy and Short Round's relationship of being the central focus of the film. It's already the most compelling relationship in the movie, but it could have been so much more if they really focused on him mentoring this kid, instead of the extremely fucking cringe scene where he and Willy are in their bedrooms and thinking about visiting each other, and god, it is so hard to like this movie. There are so many elements I really love and consider to be among the best in any Indiana Jones film. But on the other hand, it lacks a lot of heart. It lacks intrigue. It lacks momentum. And the raft scene is dumber than the fridge from Crystal Skull, sorry not sorry. Back when the Indiana Jones series was merely a trilogy, this was the pretty obvious black sheep of the family, even to Spielberg. While promoting Last Crusade, Spielberg went on record saying, "I wasn't too happy with Temple of Doom at all. It was too dark, too subterranean, and much too horrific. I thought it out-poltered Poltergeist. There's not an ounce of my own personal feeling in Temple of Doom." George Lucas personally blamed the darkness of the story on the divorce he was going through while writing it. But I don't know if the story being dark was really the problem. I like the dark elements. I like how it was so intense that it literally invented the PG-13 rating, since too many parents complained that it wasn't suitable for PG audiences. I just wish there was a little more substance to it. The Indiana Jones movies are kinda big action flicks, but they're not big, dumb action flicks. They're pulpy and campy, like the adventure serials Spielberg and Lucas grew up with and based them on. But they nonetheless tell intriguing stories about epic quests to uncover historical artifacts, as well as showcasing the hubris of those who would misuse their power. A lot of thought goes into these movies, but that just doesn't come across with Temple of Doom. This veers a lot more into big, dumb action. And while the action is incredible, the story isn't really strong or interesting enough to back it up. That's why, at its core, I don't think this lives up to the high standards set by the other entries in the trilogy. And that's before we get into the racism or the Willy. But you know what? At the end of the day, I love Short Round, I love the action. It's pretty wholesome that the actress who played Willy ended up marrying Spielberg, so this wasn't a total loss for him. And the levels based on this movie and the Lego game were pretty fun. So I think Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom deserves a very slight pass. Give us a fucking Short Round movie now, you cowards. Or you could just let this franchise end. That might actually be preferable. Yeah, actually, just do that.
Set fire to the sun!
I've seen a couple people claim that Spielberg isn't really good at making serious movies, and that he should have just stuck to blockbusters. While I don't think that's true at all, and I really love a lot of his serious work, I will admit it kinda took him a little bit to find his footing with prestigious adult dramas. In my mind, no movie of his feels more transitional than Empire of the Sun. A movie that's trying to be a brutal depiction of the loss of innocence as a child gets torn from his family by war and disillusioned with the world, and yet, I don't know, I just don't feel the heaviness that the story should be depicting until the final act. Parts of this feel a little too crowd-pleasery, if that makes sense. Like, this kid gets put in an internment camp, and the initial scene showing his life there is really whimsical for some reason. Like, there's sweeping, majestic John Williams music, and a lot of people seem to be adapting just fine to living here. Some people are suffering, but that's not really the focus. The movie mainly wants us to feel inspired that this kid is making the best of a bad situation. But as a result, it's kinda hard to get invested in his dramatic struggle. I like the first act just fine, where his world got torn apart, and the scene where he gets separated from his mother is pretty strong. It was a good start to the film, but the second act just kinda tanked my investment. I don't know. It felt very tonally confused, like it had no idea what kind of story it wanted to tell. I think the third act finally brought it around to what it should have been the whole time though. This kid journeying alone and really suffering as a result of the war. There's some great sequences here, like when he witnesses what he thinks is an acquaintance going to heaven, only to learn later that, oh, that was the atomic bomb going off. To me, scenes like this are where the movie finally really finds its footing. 2 hours into the 2 hour and 30-minute runtime. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad film. I was invested enough the whole time in whether or not this kid would ever see his parents again. There's plenty of decent moments throughout, but it's just not a great film, even though it clearly wants to be one. It's just kind of okay, with a lot of really misguided elements that prevent it from reaching its full potential. Also, I hate to say it, but the kid constantly screaming during the first act kinda got on my nerves after a while. That's more so a direction and script thing, and less about his acting though. He gives a pretty good child performance overall. I wonder if he ever appeared in anything after this. Holy shit! So, my uncultured ass just kinda thought Christian Bale broke onto the scene with Newsies. I somehow went my entire life without realizing that one of the greatest modern actors we have made his film debut as the lead of a Spielberg movie at age 13. So, I guess this movie is pretty novel if you want to see a performance from the kid who would grow up to be Patrick Bateman. And Batman.
Gotta love Look at the sky!
Real talk for a sec, I honestly keep forgetting Christian Bale played Batman somehow. I only associate him with prestigious Oscar-nominated roles, and also Patrick Bateman. Anyway, yeah, young Bale is good, the rest of the movie's fine. It looks really pretty, has some decent sequences, it's overall a solid movie. But I do feel like Spielberg lacked the chops at this stage of his career to make this as dramatic and heavy as it could have been. We'll see what he can really do in terms of drama later.
The video game that lets you help E.T. get home.
E.T. is a masterpiece if you're like 9 years old. For me personally, I liked it. I thought it was cute. But that's about it. To be honest, I don't really understand the reputation this one has. It's a solid little movie, but I can't even begin to understand the thought process behind calling this one of Spielberg's best films. I really like E.T. himself. It's crazy how they took this ugly looking little raisin man and made him weirdly endearing and adorable over the course of the film. Though, I think the copy I first watched was some weird special edition where they replaced some of the shots of him with CG. My girlfriend and I picked up a DVD copy from the library, and it didn't have any advertising on the packaging that this was a special edition, so we were blindsided with some truly magic-ruining, ugly as sin CGI. It honestly looks so bad that I went back and watched the entire movie a second time, just to make sure the bad CG wasn't negatively affecting my ranking of it. It reminded me a lot of the Star Wars special editions, actually. Oh god, those are the only easily available editions of the original trilogy. There are kids nowadays who are gonna grow up thinking ugly CGI Jabba was always part of A New Hope. What a dark era we live in. Speaking of Star Wars though, I like the Star Wars references in this. It was cute to see Spielberg reference the movies one of his best friends made. I like how E.T. sees Yoda and assumes he's from his home, which ties into the fact that the E.T. aliens show up in the Senate in Phantom Menace. E.T. could very well be canon to Star Wars, as well as What's Up, Balloon to the Rescue.
We mustn't forget to write the ETs to thank them for these lasers.
That's great. I really like Gertie and how sassy she was. I wonder what the actress who played her is doing now. Oh. Anyway, while Gertie's pretty funny, I just don't find any of the other kids all that interesting or entertaining, especially not Elliot. I don't know, maybe he's just meant to be a self-insert for kids at home to imagine themselves hanging out with E.T., but he's not a particularly special or memorable protagonist. The movie is also kind of simplistic and meandering, particularly in its first hour. It has its moments, but aside from how charming E.T. can be, I don't really get a whole lot out of that first hour. I don't care much for the bond Elliot forms with E.T., partially because I don't care for Elliot that much, but also because they spend a fair amount of time apart. And the filmmaking on display is really not that special, especially by the high standards of Spielberg, who had proven time and time again to be capable of much more than the rather standard way this film is shot. By the halfway mark, I thought the movie was fine enough, but nothing all that great. Then E.T. falls into a ditch and dies. This is where the movie starts getting really good, in my opinion. The weird connection that E.T. and Elliot have actually pays off, since they both start to perish, significantly raising the stakes, cause, well, you don't want either of them to die. This part of the movie is tense, investing, and emotional as all hell because of how attached we grew to E.T. in the first half. I didn't even love that first half, and yet I love the little alien raisin dude. I just want him to be okay and get home, alright? I was so taken aback because I didn't know anything about the plot of this film. I didn't know they were gonna kill him. That's sad as shit. I might actually have cried a little bit. The climax and ending are also really exciting and emotional, respectively. Pure Spielbergian, John Williamsian magic right there. So yeah, based on the second half, I can kinda get on board the hype train with this movie. But with that said, I still find it a bit of a slog to get to those parts I really do love. Again, the stuff I find average and the stuff I find great balance out to make a pretty good film. I just personally don't understand how so many people call this one of Spielberg's greatest films of all time, especially considering how insanely stacked the man's filmography is, with far more visually inventive and grippingly plotted features than this. I really do wish I could love this more. But like, I already watched it twice for this video. There's not a whole lot else I can do if my feelings didn't change much the second time. The good news is you can have your own opinions and you don't have to take mine as gospel. You are aware of that, right? Oh god, there are people out there who take my opinions as gospel. Why the fuck would anyone do that? It's been a while since Theater Kid Schaff made an appearance on this channel, and I wish it was under better circumstances. But I regret to report that I think I've kinda fallen out of love with West Side Story. Don't get me wrong, the 2021 film adaptation is really good, and that's largely owed to my two favorite Steven S's, Spielberg and Sondheim, a match made in heaven. The best parts of the musical West Side Story are its songs, which have endured in our culture for generations because they're just so damn good. And they're brought to life with some of the tightest, most energized direction I've seen from Spielberg since the 2000s. The sets, the blocking, the choreography, the cinematography. God damn, does our boy direct the hell out of this movie. It's simply electric and magical, making you wish that he didn't wait over 50 years to make his first musical, cause he's so damn good at it. So many of the numbers in this film, from America to Dear Officer Krupke to The Jets Are Gonna Have Their Way Tonight. I don't know the name of that song. It was easier to sing that one line instead of looking it up. Anyway, all of these sequences are 10 out of 10s. Just absolutely spectacular. That shot of the puddle during Maria puts 90% of all other movie shots to shame. The tension in the air during the rumble is so palpable, and the third act is so somber and well put together. I really cannot stress enough that this is one of my favorite Spielberg movies if we're solely judging it by the way he directs it. Just incredible. But with that said, I don't really like the movie's story or main characters, and I think that's kind of a big problem for a movie. But like, genuine question, is it sacrilege to say that? Do any of us actually believe this is one of the great theatrical stories? Or is it just carried mainly by Bernstein and Sondheim's excellent music and lyrics? I don't know, man. I kind of think it's the latter. The story hinges on a 2-day romance, a figure that is less time than a typical Disney romance happens in. And those are supposed to be fairy tales that you don't take super seriously. Here, a serious story about gang warfare and racism is combined with two people instantly falling in love without knowing anything about each other, and we're just supposed to be down for that? Hell, I barely know anything about Tony and Maria as individuals, let alone as a couple. Their chemistry in this movie is passable, I guess, but nothing spectacular, really. I got a little swept up in their romance during Tonight, but again, that's kinda just because the music is good. The characters really ain't. And this is before Tony kills Maria's brother in cold blood. Well, now I especially don't want to see them get together. Oh, they're fucking. He stabbed his brother in the chest and now they're having sex. Seriously, why are they soulmates? I don't get it. I felt more believable chemistry between the leads of Romeo and Juliet Sealed with a Kiss, which is a movie that retells Romeo and Juliet except they're seals. It's peak cinema, better than everything that hack Steven Spinning made. Seriously though, I was never a huge fan of the Romeo and Juliet narrative in general, so I don't think it's a surprise that I'm not particularly fond of this adaptation of it. Which is frustrating because this film adaptation of that adaptation is so damn good in spite of it all. Spielberg is operating at the fullest capacity we've seen from him in years, and the cast is pretty excellent across the board. I don't know why Mike Feist didn't get more traction during award season. He's probably the standout of the whole film for me. Ariana DeBose absolutely kills it, Rachel Zegler gives a great performance, Ansel Elgort should be in prison, and it's great to see Rita Moreno in a different supporting role than the one she had in the original film. It's a film I like, but it's so frustrating because I want to love it more than anything. Everything came together for it, except for the source material it was adapting. I'm sorry, but when I'm questioning whether the movie even wants me to take the central romance seriously, then I don't think it's a very good central romance. A good movie based on a good musical with magical, transcendent songs and choreography. I really wish it was more than that for me though.
Welcome to Shark Island. Why get high when you can get low?
Jaws was the birthplace of the modern summer blockbuster. It changed everything in the realm of Hollywood. Some would say for the worse. But hey, at least it was a good-ass movie in its own right. This movie famously worked within the limitations of the shark animatronic not really functioning that well, and opted not to show it for the majority of the runtime. Instead, building up suspense with ominous underwater shots and a chilling John Williams score. It's honestly pretty effective, even by modern standards. Okay, this isn't the most terrifying film in the world, but it still offers a tremendous amount of dread and visceral excitement as we wait for Don Lino to show back up and start tearing people to shreds. And of course, the movie also makes a salient point that people in charge will almost always prioritize profits over keeping people's lives safe. Like, a ton of people came back to the beach on the 4th of July, but that's not good enough for the mayor. He wants them to go in the water to show on TV that, hey, the water's fine. Everybody else come here and support our economy. He had such a great time sowing, but then when he had to reap, he was like, okay, I may have gone too far in a few places. Karmic justice. Hey, does the mayor in this movie remind anyone else of the mayor from Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs? Or is that just a me thing because my brain is broken? Anyway, this is an intriguing, entertaining, suspenseful, and perfectly paced film for the first hour. Yeah, does anyone else just kind of check out mentally when they're on the boat? I mean, my favorite aspect of this film is seeing the danger that Frankie poses to the people of Amity Island, and the fact that the higher-ups don't care and keep the beach open anyway. All those themes and all those intense dramatic stakes kind of fall off once it's just these 3 guys on the boat for an hour. I mean, I still hope that they don't die, but I was a lot more invested in whether these innocent kids and islanders were gonna die or not. Don't get me wrong, it's not like the second half is bad or anything. It has plenty of great moments. Quint's monologue is really strong, and I enjoy the back and forth bickering he has with Hooper. When Brody says, "You're gonna need a bigger boat," I was like, oh no way, that's a sick Jaws reference. Hey, how come the protagonist of this movie is named Martin Brody, and then Indiana Jones introduces Marcus Brody? Spielberg, you hack! Anyway, the final battle with Lenny was also really good, and I bet these guys are happy that Quint got eaten, because now they don't have to pay him for his shark hunting services. Huh, guess it all worked out. Overall, Jaws is a good movie, but I only really love the first half. While the second half is decent, but kinda repetitive and not nearly as engaging for me personally. So basically the opposite problem as E.T. I'm gonna get so much flack for not liking these movies as much as everyone else. Oh man. Oh well. I totally get and respect how this invented the summer blockbuster. It's tense, exciting, and pretty ambitious. It was actually the first major motion picture to be shot on the ocean. So congrats to Steven Spielberg for inventing the concept of putting a camera on a boat and then putting that boat on the water. It changed movies forever. Oh, and also all the other cool stuff he did with this movie. Congrats about that.
Like the color purple.
The Color Purple is pretty good. This is one of those movies that I don't want to delve too deep into because of its heavy subject matter, so I'll just say that this film is anchored by a good story and amazing performances. Did you guys know Oprah could act? I genuinely did not know. But yeah, she's amazing in this film, as is Whoopi Goldberg in her breakthrough role. There are some exceptional sequences that made me tear up a bit, and overall, it's a pretty strong film. I think it's kinda held back for me by the fact that, well, I don't really understand why Spielberg was handed this material. Like, surely this movie where 98% of the characters are black should have gone to a black director. Apparently Spielberg himself was reluctant to make this film for that very reason. And like, it's not just about optics either. Something just feels off about his direction here. It's hard to really describe what it is, but kinda like Empire of the Sun, I just feel like there's some really dark subject matter here that doesn't mesh with his sweeping, optimistic, sentimental style. Parts of it click, like the ending, but other aspects of the story don't feel as intense as they should be. Plus, I feel like there are a couple bits with this abusive guy that are meant to be comedic, and I don't like that at all. I don't know, even though parts of this are a bit iffy, it still tells a good story, has a ton of excellent performances, and contains some really powerful scenes. Pretty good, though it probably would have been a true masterpiece if it wasn't a part of Spielberg's filmography.
Fuck, man. What else is there to say?
Munich is perhaps Spielberg's most controversial film to date. Not so much in terms of its quality, I think everyone pretty much agrees it's good and well made, but in terms of its subject matter and how it portrays certain groups. I don't really want to delve too deeply into this one for obvious reasons, but I will say that it's definitely very good. It's one of his bleakest films ever, if that means anything to you. A lot of people accuse him of being too soft and sentimental in a lot of his films, but that certainly can't be said about this one. The assassination attempts are very tense and engaging. There was one in particular early on that really had my heart beating obscenely fast. And it's also fascinating to see the main character question the morality of his actions and whether he can trust his government. With that said, you kind of get the gist of that after the first hour, and then the second hour is kind of just more of the same. There are a few additional twists and turns, but the large bulk of this movie is assassination attempt, followed by contemplating if revenge is bad, followed by another assassination attempt. The first hour really engaged me, but by the second hour, I lost a bit of interest since the film became rather repetitive. But it definitely reeled me back in with the last half hour, which was probably my favorite part of the whole movie, to the point where I wish it could have been expanded on. I would gladly watch more of this guy just trying to live with the shit he did and grappling with PTSD. It was a lot more gripping than the middle chunk of this movie. The sex scene towards the end was a bit much. Not that I'm a prude when it comes to sex scenes in general, it's just, I don't know, I really couldn't take it seriously. Watch it and you'll know what I mean. But aside from that, yeah, a great first hour, an excellent conclusion, a second hour that desperately needed to be condensed. Less is more after all. Still, very much worth your time. Alright, before we continue on with the list, I want to circle back to Jaws for a second here. You know what would have made that shark cooler? If it was surfing! I think you know where I'm going with this. Surfshark VPN, an incredible product that encrypts your data and protects you online. Surfshark VPN allows you to access geo-restricted content, meaning you can trick your browser into thinking you're in another country, thus allowing you to access content you couldn't get otherwise. That way, you don't have to physically travel to another country to watch that country's exclusive Netflix or Disney Plus content, for example. You know how Indiana Jones travels to different countries via map? Yeah, you don't have to do that at all, just stay in one place on the map. That's the power of Surfshark. You can also use Surfshark and its Surfshark alert system to get alerts anytime your email address or password is compromised. Surfshark Alert scans various databases of leaked information and notifies its users if their data is found so they can take action, which is an absolutely invaluable feature. Surfshark is also totally unlimited, meaning you can use it on as many devices as you like, even all at the same time. No other VPN allows this. Now, for the holidays, we've got an extra special deal in store. Go to surfshark.deal/Rillis and enter promo code Rillis to get 83% off and 6 extra months of Surfshark VPN for free. That's right, baby, 6. It's an incredible limited time offer deal, and it's even better because it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're not satisfied, you can cancel during those 30 days and get your money back. If you're looking for a great VPN, there's no reason not to give Surfshark a try. Once again, head to surfshark.deal/Rillis and enter the promo code Rillis. Have a great time with Surfshark VPN.
Awesome news! There's a tracker coming!
So, you know how I said Temple of Doom is the most insane movie Spielberg has ever made? Well, it still is. But second place would have to go to Duel, Spielberg's first ever feature-length film. Now, this was technically a TV movie originally, so I was hesitant to count it for this ranking, but my friends said I should, so here it is. I mean, whatever, it's a TV movie. It's probably not anything super crazy. Oh my god! What the f is happening? Ah! So, Steven Spielberg's first ever feature-length film is about a guy being chased by a truck driver who is trying to murder him. That's it. That's the entire plot. And it's awesome. I love the fact that you never even see the truck driver. That just makes him so much more ominous. My friend and I just assumed he looks like Dennis from the SpongeBob movie. But yeah, this lunatic looms over this entire film, trying to kill this guy because he passed him on the highway. You know what? That does sound realistic, actually. Anyway, the entire movie consists of tense road rage chases and psychological warfare, all with some slick as hell cinematography and editing. Spielberg was cooking even back in 1971. It's amazing what he can accomplish with a truck, a camera, and a dream. There's such a distinct visual language to this movie, to the point where it cut to a close-up shot of a tunnel, and I knew that damn truck was gonna pop out of it. Even then, you can never predict what heinous mind games this monster is gonna play on our main man. It's just insane from start to finish. Yeah, the movie's fairly one note, with no real deeper themes or anything. What you see is what you get. And some scenes can go on for too long, like it feels a tad stretched out to hit that 90-minute runtime. But damn it, it's worth it to see all the insane set pieces and witness the incredibly cathartic ending. It's slick, it's stylish, it's exciting, it's raw as hell. Spielberg never made anything quite like it again, and that's a damn shame. But that's your cue to go check it out, baby!
Take us to your leader! Your cheerleader.
You ever just watch a movie where you're like, wow, this is amazing. Why is it considered divisive among critics and the general public? Then you get to the third act and you're like, oh, okay, that checks out. Yeah, that's War of the Worlds for me. For the first hour of this film, I was beyond gripped to my seat. Spielberg's visceral visual depiction of a hostile alien invasion, while obviously drawing inspiration from the classic H.G. Wells story of the same name, is yet another feather in the cap of one of the most skilled blockbuster filmmakers to ever grace American cinema. The way the first alien encounter is constructed, from the cinematography to the practical effects, it all adds up to something truly awe-inspiring. Visually, this film perfectly showcases the weight and terror of an apocalypse. It's one of the most horrific pictures he's ever produced. Definitely not the goriest, but one of the most holy shit we're fucked-iest. And yet, as unnerving as the aliens are, this film also portrays the mistrust and paranoia among the people of Earth. My favorite scene in the whole film, and one of the tensest, doesn't have any aliens at all. It's just an angry mob attacking Tom Cruise and his kids because they have the only car. One dude tears the fucking glass off the windshield. It's like, oh my god, people, chill the hell out. We got aliens to deal with. But ultimately, it does make sense why they would act like this. The Earth has been torn asunder, and they need to do what they have to survive. Earlier in the movie, Tom Cruise grabbed a gun, and I was like, what does he think the tiny-ass gun is gonna do against the aliens? But then, it ended up being crucial to this scene. And I was like, wow, the gun came back. They should make a term for, like, when a gun comes back in a story. Like they should name it after some guy who, like, says that happens. I'm shocked that they've never done that before. Anyway, this was an amazing-ass movie at this point. There are some things I found weird, like when Tom Cruise is driving down this road. Somehow it's not all wall-to-wall traffic. All the people whose cars broke down conveniently moved them out of the way. Sure. And I also found the son character a bit annoying, like, oh hell yeah dad, we gotta fight the aliens. Like, is he stupid? But aside from this minor stuff, I was ready to declare this one of Spielberg's surprise best films. And then we go to this bunker with this guy who wants to fight the aliens, and it lost me a bit. Like, Tom Cruise never stayed put for this long. Why do we spend 20 in-movie minutes here? There was a pretty good tense scene with this tentacle sentry looking for humans, but otherwise, it wasn't super interesting. And then there's the thing that really killed it. For some reason, after the tentacle sentry goes away, the aliens themselves come down, and they look like shit. This movie did such a great job seamlessly blending timeless-looking CG into the environments. But then we got these bozos! This is the threat? It was a lot more tense when we didn't know what they looked like. Because now that I know they look like stupid little CGI goblins, I don't find myself intimidated by them. And this scene was so pointless too. Nothing comes out of it. You could have just had the dead arm at the end and not show the rest of their designs, leaving it up to our imagination. And then there's the other thing. So, I'm not gonna harp too much on how the aliens get defeated, since it's part of the original story. Though, I do think it suits that original story better than an action blockbuster film, since it does come across as a bit underwhelming here. But whatever, this is H.G. Wells' vision, I'll accept it. What I can't accept is the stupid son who left halfway through to fight aliens, making it out alive with absolutely no explanation. It looked like he exploded, but nope, here he is. What was the point of that? What's the point of his character at all? The movie would have been just fine with Tom Cruise and Dakota Fanning. Whatever. I still think it's a great movie at the end of the day. One that probably does a great job of capturing the zeitgeist of post-9/11 America. I wouldn't know, I was 3 at the time, but I wouldn't be shocked if this was generally how it was. It's well worth checking out. Just maybe shut your eyes when the aliens are on screen. Not because they're too scary, literally for the opposite reason. Maybe you'll be able to still find them intimidating if you don't see them.
Tintin! Stop whatever boring adventure you're doing and come with me!
First things first, I gotta tell you guys that I absolutely cracked the hell up seeing the Nickelodeon Movies logo in front of a Spielberg movie. Like, what? But I guess it sort of makes sense since this is the only animated movie Spielberg has ever made. And much like how West Side Story made a lot of critics question, how the hell has Spielberg not made more musicals? The same sentiment applies to the medium of animation. If this film is any indication, we have been robbed of his keen eye for filmmaking in a medium with unlimited visual potential. Because The Adventures of Tintin rocks. It's good as hell. Turns out this whole time, this was the 5th Indiana Jones movie, and no one was talking about it. In fact, I learned from browsing this film's Wikipedia page that Spielberg first learned of the original Tintin comics because a critic favorably compared Raiders of the Lost Ark to them back in the day. No other filmmaker in existence was a better fit for this material, and it shows. He directs the hell out of this movie, giving us stunningly creative scene transitions, well-framed and exciting action, a sheer lack of compromise on the guns and murder front, considering this is technically a kid's film, and maybe one of the most impressive one-takes I've ever seen in animation. Like, there's this action shot that just goes on with so many moving parts, and you're just like, how the fuck did they do that? It's insane that this movie came out 3 years after Crystal Skull, because it's just so much better in every way. And forget about that snooze-fest geriatric theme park ride, Dial of Destiny. Watch this real movie instead that came from a master of cinema. So with that said, is it a masterpiece? The action scenes are, but there's a couple things holding the film back from being amazing. And as sad as it is to say, one of those things is the motion capture. I mean, it's not the worst, but man, this film would have been better with regular CG animation, because some of the expressions and background humans are just not the vibe. But in addition, I feel like this movie is just paced way too fast, with very little in terms of strong character moments. It zips from one action set piece to the next, and all the while, I kept wondering, who the hell is Tintin? Like, for newcomers like me who have never heard of this franchise, this movie does a piss-poor job of establishing the character.
Hey guys, William here. Real quick while I'm editing the part, I just want to jump in and say this. I think it's really funny that there are like 3 or 4 really big, huge, popular comic series over in Europe that are like basically Mickey Mouse tier in recognizability, and America chose one of them to import over. The one we chose was the Smurfs. Why are we like this?
He mentions he writes stories, so I guess he's a journalist. But for what newspaper? Why don't we ever see that side of his life? You know, there's this other movie you might have heard of. It's called Raiders of the Lost Ark. And in that movie, we get to see Indy working at the college, and it's a sharp contrast to his adventures. As a result, the movie is paced better, since it doesn't shove us right into the main plot like this one does. I never really connected with Tintin, or felt like he had any stake in this film's conflict. I was much more invested in the Andy circus pirate, since he actually had a connection to what was going on. Tintin just kind of exists, and he's not very interesting. But you know what? His dog was cute, I'll give him that. The gap between the second and third act is also hilariously tiny. It's like, oh, the bad guy got all the clues, he's gonna get away with this. And then after like 2 minutes, they remember, oh wait, we can track him. And after that, we're immediately into the third act. Like, huh? There's just hardly ever time to breathe in this movie. I feel like if they added about 15 minutes worth of character building and ditched the motion capture, then it would be pretty close to perfect. There's some other nitpicks here and there, like, why did you bring Haddock to the opera thing if he was just gonna throw a fit? Why doesn't the villain go ahead and burn the clues instead of monologuing so Tintin has a chance to steal them? Why are the Simon Pegg and Nick Frost characters weirdly unfunny? Hell, why isn't the movie funnier in general when Edgar Wright was one of the co-writers? Explain yourself, Steven! Oh well. It had its problems, but overall, this is easily one of Spielberg's most underrated films, and one you should definitely check out to scratch that Indiana Jones itch that hasn't been addressed since like 1989. Speaking of 1989, that's the year Always came out, which reminds me to once again thank this movie for saving me from the dull monotony of that piece of shit. Remember kids, if you're watching a shitty ass movie and you need a palate cleanser, Adventures of Tintin is the way to go. Why did they call it Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark now? Indiana Jones is one of the Raiders. That would be like if you called it Alvin and the Chipmunk. Oh wait. Anyway, Raiders of the Lost Ark is a good ass movie. It's great as hell. Do I think it's this untouchable action masterpiece and the best in the Indiana Jones series? No. Truth be told, as awesome as this movie is, whenever I watch it, I can't help but shake the feeling that Last Crusade is this, but just better in most ways. Plus, Temple of Doom, as flawed as it is, has slightly more tense, pulpy, and exciting action. I don't know, even as a kid, I never really understood the idea that this was the be-all, end-all, greatest achievement of the Indiana Jones series. I also don't understand how these are considered appropriate for kids, but again, Lego Indiana Jones is a banger, so I can't complain. Anyway, the biggest thing that holds Raiders back for me is the characters. I just don't find them particularly interesting in this one. I mean, Salah's a delightful sidekick, but Indy himself is kinda just a simplistic action hero, brought to life with impeccable charisma from Harrison Ford. But I don't really think he's an interesting protagonist. And I know there's a debate over whether he should just be a cool vessel to experience the action through, versus an actually fleshed out character. But again, I feel like Last Crusade struck this balance perfectly. They fleshed Indy out in satisfying ways without getting bogged down in it. It's a far cry from his somewhat muted characterization here. And you might be wondering, why do we need a strong central character in an action movie? Well, this isn't really all action all the time. There's a lot of historical mystery elements and talking scenes. And while the mystery of uncovering the Ark is cool and intriguing, I feel like I'd be a little more invested if I cared about the characters a little more. And that extends to the love interest, Marion. Yeah, I'm sorry guys, I don't really get the hype with her. She talks a big game and has a fun attitude, but ultimately, she's just a damsel in distress for most of the film. A product of the time, sure. But I don't really get why so many people characterize her as this awesome badass, when she never really accomplishes anything herself. And this is more so the fault of Crystal Skull, but I don't buy these two as soulmates meant for each other. They have decent chemistry, but it's nothing that deep, and I can't say I'm surprised that she's out of the picture by the time Last Crusade rolls around. Even the villains in this movie are kinda weak. When I think of the antagonists in the series, I think of Elsa's seductive betrayal, and Mola Ram ripping people's goddamn hearts out. Here, I mean, Belloc is French. That's kinda scary. I like the part where the nerd with the glasses pulls out a baton, but then it turns out it's just a coat hanger. That was funny. Don't get me wrong, they're not bad villains, just serviceable ones, I don't know. Okay, so I pissed off half the population of Earth with these complaints. Now to get into why I still really love this movie. Holy shit, the action is absurd. How did they do that car chase scene? It's nuts. Indy is just one dude, and yet he beats up all these Nazis and hijacks this truck, and it's just like, damn, how did you manage that? Like, whoa. The opening scene is literally perfect. Like, no notes. It establishes everything you need to know about the tone of these movies, and why this dude is so fucking cool. I like that boulder. That is a nice boulder. There are so many good one-liners delivered by Harrison Ford, whose performance is just fantastic. So committed and charismatic. I love that one shot where Indy, Sala, and the boys are digging, and the sky is stormy and ominous. It evokes a similar skybox from the Ten Commandments, and serves as an excellent homage that really drives the point home that this guy is about to become part of biblical history. The action scene in Cairo is cool as hell, and how the hell did they make a monkey threatening? Why did they teach that monkey how to do the Nazi salute? He doesn't know he's in a movie. He doesn't know what this means. Oops, we trained a monkey to be a fascist. Whoops. Easily, without a doubt, this is one of the best action film scores I've ever heard. Every action beat and character moment is enhanced so succinctly by John Williams' magnificent music. When they're in that one chamber and the light goes and it hits the thing on the ground and they know where the Ark is, that's some cool ass shit. I like when Indy dresses up as Bazooka Trooper, who's the best character in Lego Indiana Jones, and he's gonna blow up the Ark, and it's like, whoa, oh my god, it's crazy. Hey, does anyone notice that when Belloc is talking to him, there's a bug that spontaneously appears on his face, and then it just crawls into his mouth? What? And yeah, even though this isn't my favorite Indiana Jones movie, it does contain the best scene in the entire series. And maybe the best climax of any movie ever? Which is insane, because the protagonist has no input in the outcome of this scene. And yet, sometimes you just need some divine intervention to f*** up some Nazis with good old-fashioned cosmic horror. If I'm being honest, the Ark itself is probably my favorite character in this film. There's so much ominous buildup to it littered across the movie. So many characters saying it shouldn't be disturbed and that it was never meant to be found. We get a preview of the fire and lightning it shoots out. It has an air of unspeakable power around it. And all of this buildup is paid off in the most balls to the wall, insane climax in film history. Like, yeah, there are probably crazier climaxes in movies out there, but in terms of what you expect out of a movie like this, in terms of something that seems relatively grounded and historically accurate, for it to suddenly pull this face-melting, fire and brimstone, Old Testament terror, and still have it fit within the narrative and parameters of the film, that's incredible. It might be one of the biggest swings Spielberg has ever taken in his entire career, and he knocked it out of the park. This is how you end a damn movie. So yeah, I think this film is great. Just not flawless or the best Indiana Jones film there is. If I cared about the characters more, it definitely could have been. But we'll get to a certain film like that later.
I see. It's the same as playing the piano.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind was Spielberg's first, and in my opinion, his best foray into the alien genre. It's the perfect middle ground between the benevolence of the E.T. aliens and the supreme cosmic horror of the War of the Worlds aliens. There are so many scenes and images in this film that inspire awe in both uplifting and horrifying ways. I adore the scene where the kid is abducted for just how significantly it portrays an overwhelmingly terrifying scenario through the use of mere household appliances and multicolored lights. And I adore the ending even more. It's what really made the movie for me. It went in a direction I wasn't really expecting, and my eyes were glued to the screen throughout this entire 30-minute sequence. It's honestly hard to put into words why it's so gripping, which is probably what the movie was going for. I mean, would you be able to put an alien encounter into words? Probably not. Just an absolutely breathtaking sequence that entirely nails what it's going for. As for the rest of the movie, it's pretty good. The actual alien scenes are the best parts, but the slow burn of watching this man lose his mind after his close encounter, constantly trying to recreate this mysterious shape even as it isolates his family. God forbid a man have hobbies, am I right? But no, I actually do find the family drama really interesting, and watching this kid cry as his mom and dad fight does kinda hit a bit different after the Fabelmans. The first 30 minutes that build the UFOs up are also really tense and engaging. And they do a great job of making you fearful of the true nature of these beings, all the way to the ending where all is revealed. Does that mean I enjoyed every scene getting to that ending? Well, I guess the sequence where he's evading the government and trying to climb the mountain loses me a bit. Plus, in general, the characters are a little weak in this movie. Like, I don't remember a single one of their names. Except for the kid. I remembered his name is Barry, because it made me think of the show Barry. Can't believe this kid grows up to be a hitman, SMH. Did the aliens teach him nothing? Oh well, this is a great-ass movie, and I totally get why everyone holds it up as a classic. In fact, I'm kinda surprised it's not more iconic and as big of a cornerstone in pop culture. Like, it is. They even referenced it in Monsters vs. Aliens, so that's how you know you made it big. But I don't think it's quite on the same level as E.T. and Jaws, which is a shame, because I honestly like it a lot better than both those films, good as they are. It's a wonderful time, and you should get cultured by watching it now.
Whopper, 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 whopper.
I might just be the only person on the face of the earth who has The Terminal in their top 10 favorite Spielberg movies. But you know what? It's just really heckin' charming. It's an overload of charm. Charm by the buckets full. And like, yeah, it can be pretty cheesy and simplistic and wildly unrealistic at times. But I don't know, man. I think it's a really likable and great film. Why does it have a 61% on Rotten Tomatoes? Are they stupid? Okay, what's this movie about? Tom Hanks plays an Eastern European guy from a war-torn country who, due to a technicality, is not allowed to return home nor allowed entry to the United States. So basically, he just has to live at the airport. That's it. That's pretty much the entire premise. And it works. Oh my god, it's such an enjoyable movie. The character Hanks plays is this endearing sweetheart who befriends nearly everyone he comes across. He meets Cassian Andor, who really wants to go out with Gamora, so he helps bring the two of them together. He meets this janitor who purposely makes the floor wet because he enjoys watching people slip, and also he killed a man. At one point, he eats a Whopper, triple Whopper, and also he goes to Borders. Aww, I miss Borders. He finagles his way into a job, goes on a date or two with this flight attendant lady, and manages to evade the watchful eye of the goofy villain who runs the airport. It's all pretty fun stuff. I was on board bored from the premise alone, because I've always been fascinated by how airports are like mini shopping malls, and I've always wondered what it would be like to live in one. So not only did this movie give me a unique premise I wanted to see, but it also turned out to be incredibly silly. This is a silly-ass movie, and while that worked for the most part, there were a few things that were so far out there that they just didn't fly for me. Like, the Cassie and Andor dating Gamora subplot is cute, but when you see how far it progresses, you just kind of ask yourself, wait, they're doing this now? Have they even had a one-on-one conversation yet? Maybe they did, but the movie never really makes it clear. The villain is fun, but some of his antics are just a little too over the top. And then there's the dumbest scene in the movie, right after a really good scene where Tom Hanks helps this immigrant out. The villain gets really mad and pins Tom Hanks against this photocopier, which makes all these copies of his hand. Then the story gets out about how Tom Hanks helped the immigrant, and everyone in the entire airport is so proud of him. So they tape photocopies of his hands to the wall of all of their stores, and they're all just looking at him in awe. It's basically the equivalent of, and then everyone clapped, and it was so damn cheesy. Like, the rest of the movie is just gently sticking its chip into the cheese dip, but with this scene, they're just putting their whole mouth in the dip. Anyway, I hate to complain so much because really, I love everything else about this movie. In spite of the bleak way the premise is set up, it soon becomes a legitimately optimistic and whimsical story about one of the nicest gosh darn guys there is, making the best of a bad situation. It's a very fun time, and I feel like anyone could enjoy it. Now I'm hungry for Whopper, Whopper, Triple Whopper. Be right back.
You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man.
Catch Me If You Can is a bomb-ass movie. It's so good. Just this insanely fun and riveting caper film where young Leonardo DiCaprio cons his way through life, all as Tom Hanks tries to catch him. If he can. Hanks is as good as usual, but Leo's performance in this is really captivating. It's always crazy looking back and thinking, wait, this is the only movie Leo and Spielberg made together. That's kind of wild. I guess Leo was too busy being in every modern Scorsese movie to meet up with old Steve again, which is a shame because they struck it gold here. Leo is so charismatic and convincing in this movie that you start to believe him too, even though you know he's lying. I like the connection these guys start to form even though they're enemies. They're both just two lonely dudes with no one else to talk to, and their connection is paid off really well by the film's conclusion. This is also probably one of, if not the funniest movies Spielberg has ever made. It's so consistently humorous, both from the jokes and the escalating absurdity of how they haven't caught this guy yet. The lengths he goes to evade capture and scam more and more people is just insane. And you keep wondering throughout, oh, is this scam gonna be it? Has he girl bossed too close to the sun with this one? It's an incredible balancing act. Young Amy Adams is in this, like before she became famous, so that's cool to see. She has what is probably the funniest line in the movie and all of Spielberg's filmography. I won't spoil it here, but it's on my Letterboxd review if you're curious. Christopher Walken gives a great performance as Frank's dad. And speaking of which, there's a lot to be said here about how divorce leads children to the worst places and how much it affects Frank. It's one of the most interesting Spielberg movies to watch post-Fabelmans, because I imagine he really connected with a lot of this material. And it shows. This movie is slick, well shot, well edited, well written, definitely one of my favorites from him. I think some stretches of it can be a bit slow, particularly when Frank is in one place for too long, but it's overall a wonderful film. Definitely give it a watch if you haven't. I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that the 2010s were probably Spielberg's weakest decade as a director. The 70s, 80s, and 90s are all loaded with bona fide classics, the 2000s are filled with underrated gems, and the 2020s are off to a fantastic start thanks to West Side Story and The Fabelmans. But like, look at the 2010s lineup, man. With the exception of Tintin, it looks like a pretty standard collection of boring-ass movies an old man would make, with some childish garbage thrown in for good measure. Nothing in this decade has had any cultural impact, and they range from really bad to decent enough, I guess. At least, that's what I assumed at first. But then, I took another look at The Post. I watched it back then for the 2017 Oscars, and you know, I thought it was fine. It just looks rather unimpressive in a year that gave us Get Out, Lady Bird, Phantom Thread, 3 Billboards, Blade Runner 2049, and the boss baby, I don't know. 2017 was one of the best recent years for cinema, so a lot of people weren't as interested in just another Spielberg movie. Myself included, given how underwhelmed I was by Lincoln and Bridge of Spies. But watching it again 6 years later, my mind has completely changed on this one. This is one of the best movies Spielberg has ever made. Like, it's so gripping and intense and dramatic, and it held my interest the entire way through. It's a semi-fictional account of the Washington Post getting their hands on the Pentagon Papers and coming to grips with whether or not they should hashtag expose Nixon and risk going to prison, or stand by the principles of democracy. A lot of the entertainment value comes from how frantic it feels, capturing the chaos of a newsroom and slowly escalating it as the stakes get higher. The cinematography here is a lot more compelling than 2010 Spielberg usually pulls off, with a lot of great tracking shots and long takes that fully immerse you into the chaos of what's going on. The acting is also top-notch. Meryl Streep is very good. Tom Hanks plays a much more intense and kind of asshole-ish character compared to what we're used to, and he's great. But the star of the show for me was... Even though I watched this movie in 2017, I had no idea Bob Odenkirk was in it. This is actually a common problem for me. Before I watched Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, I had no idea who he was, and I just registered him in movies as some guy. Now that I know he's Saul Goodman, I can suddenly go back to movies I saw before and be like, oh, that was Saul Goodman the whole time. That's why people laughed so hard when he was the dad in Little Women. That was him in Incredibles 2 as what's his name? Damn, Incredibles 2 really wasted Bob Odenkirk, huh? Well, he's not wasted here. He's one of the main characters and he does a great job. Aside from his accent fluctuating back and forth, that was a little iffy. But yeah, good stuff. On top of pointing at the screen whenever an actor I knew showed up, like Jesse Plemons or Alison Brie, I was also just completely gripped by the story. It's very straightforward, and yet it paints a compelling portrait of these journalists' resolve to do the right thing, despite all the shit Nixon throws at them. And I guess that's one other thing I better talk about. This isn't a story about dealing with Nixon. I mean, it is, and it functions perfectly as such. But look at what year it came out. Remember who the president was back then? No. Yeah, so those comparisons dominated the conversation about this movie upon its release. But I have to say, watching it 6 years later, I really wasn't thinking about Trump at all. It's subtle enough that I don't think anyone could really tell when this movie came out if they didn't know. I'm sure the parallels were intentional, but the film doesn't rely on being anti-Trump as its main selling point. I mean, maybe that was the main selling point for its awards campaign, but it holds up perfectly fine without that element. And that's good, because in general, I find a lot of Orange Man bad media from that era to be super corny. Like, I agree with you guys, just find a more subtle, less stupid way of telling it, you know? And I think this is that. Unfortunately, the movie does kinda succumb to stupidity with one of the dumbest endings I think I've ever seen in any Spielberg movie. Nixon is like, "Grr, curse those Washington Post reporters. I don't want them in the White House again." And then it cuts to a security guard discovering a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. And all of this is punctuated with this corny-ass dramatic music that continues into the credits. Like we're teasing the sequel that's gonna form the NCU, Nixon Cinematic Universe. I actually laughed out loud at this ending. It is so much dumber than I remember. But I wouldn't change a thing about it. No notes. Aside from that, I feel like Meryl Streep's character isn't really integrated into the plot enough for much of the third act to revolve around her. And there's some corny scenes, like when she's leaving the Supreme Court and passing by all these women who look so proud of her. Like, how inspiring that this rich white lady who inherited a newspaper from her family didn't really do anything aside from approving Tom Hanks publishing the story. But ultimately, a bit of third act corniness can't hold this back from being one of my all-time favorites from Spielberg. And I never thought I'd say that. But it's just so engaging, well-crafted, and excellent. Give it a watch if you haven't.
And what my dad thinks I'm a joke too.
Yeah, well, your dad's right!
Like I said at the beginning, The Fabelmans is the whole reason this video exists in the first place. It's the culmination of Spielberg's entire career and life. A truly special autobiographical film that we never get to see from some of the most acclaimed and iconic directors. I really loved it when I first watched it, and it sent me down a year-long path of being so fascinated with this guy and watching all of his movies. And now, watching it for a second time almost a year later, I kind of love it even more. It's so rich, so detailed, so funny at some points and heartbreaking at others, so warm when it needs to be and detached and unfeeling when it needs to be. It's just wonderful. As I said in my best movies of 2022 video, I'm not always on board for a self-congratulatory circle jerk movie that celebrates how great the movies are. But that really doesn't come across at all in this film. It feels far more genuine and less pandering. Right from the start, where Sammy witnesses a train wreck on screen, briefly haunted by those images, only to dedicate his time to recreating it himself to figure out how they did it. Like, that's how you express the magic of movies from the eyes of a young child. It's such a subtle thing you probably wouldn't think about, but yeah, effects like these are literally mind-blowing, and trying to reverse engineer them and make them yourself? What a great way to step into the world of movies. Every new filmmaking discovery Sammy makes from then on is so compelling, so cool to see unfold before our very eyes. And the movie is, obviously, keenly aware of the power cinema can hold. I really didn't expect any internal conflicts to come from the bully character, of all people. But the scene where he can't grapple with his larger-than-life portrayal in Sammy's film is one of the best scenes in the movie somehow. I'm totally on board with the filmmaking storyline in this movie. But the thing that really makes The Fabelmans as special as it is the family drama and how it intersects with Sammy's filmmaking goals. Since the movie is new-ish, I kinda don't want to reveal the main conflict if you haven't seen it. Cause it's one of those things that you don't immediately pick up on, but once you give this movie a second watch, you realize how blatantly obvious it was, and you question how you didn't see it until, well, it's too late. I imagine that's how Sammy and the rest of his family felt. It takes a whole lot of emotional honesty and vulnerability to depict your parents the way Spielberg does here. Even though the whole ordeal was over 50 years ago for him, it feels like he never really recovered from it. Speaking of which, very few things in Spielberg's entire filmography hold as much power as this one shot, where Sammy's parents deliver some devastating news that his sisters react to normally, and yet he just sees himself filming it in the mirror. It's such an untouchably great moment, showcasing not only how detached Sammy has become from his family life, as Uncle Boris said he would, but also serving as a reflection of how for some people, the only way to process devastating life events is to put it in your art. Spielberg had already reflected this moment in so many of his previous films, but to finally visually show us the process behind it, it's absolutely unreal. You can just tell he was holding this shot in his entire life. And I'm so glad he got to make not only it, but the entire movie surrounding it. His direction and the script he co-wrote are excellent, and the cast sells every moment so perfectly. Gabriel LaBelle is so strong as Sammy. Paul Dano gives such a great, quiet, and understated performance as a man who just accepts his life falling apart around him. Michelle Williams captures all the nuances and contradictions of her character perfectly. Judd Hirsch was only in one scene, but it was a good scene, and he was good in it. I don't know why he was nominated for an Oscar for that one scene, but sure. The cameo at the end was beyond iconic. And hell, even Seth Rogen is really good in this. It sounds insane, the idea that this is the movie and this is the role Spielberg cast Seth Rogen in, but damn, I don't know, it genuinely works. You believe the thing that's going on with this character is going on. He's pretty damn good in this role. At one point, there's a monkey that's named after Seth Rogen's character. This is a clever reference to Seth Rogen playing Donkey Kong. Bravo, Spielberg. As an aside, this movie's obviously semi-fictional, so it's safe to assume not every single thing in it happened in real life. But I knew that the monkey was too damn out there to not be a real thing. My friend looked it up, and yep, it's real. Spielberg's mom had a monkey. That's pretty chicanerous. Anyway, I suppose in terms of problems, this movie does drag a tiny bit at parts, but not really that many. Like I said, I was even more engaged the second time around. Not only because it's a film that rewards a second viewing, but maybe because in between those two viewings, I saw most of this man's entire filmography. I witnessed the pieces of him that he put in the films he created. I read a lot about him and the things he did on his journey to become the most financially successful and one of the most acclaimed directors of all time. The Fabelmans is such a vital and instantly iconic part of his filmography. One that I'll remember for years to come for its warm sentimentality and brutal honesty. It's a film that makes you feel more connected to him than any of his previous work could possibly accomplish. I absolutely adore it, and I would recommend it to anyone who's seen at least one of his other movies, because it'll probably make you appreciate that movie even more. I didn't know anything about AI artificial intelligence going in, other than the fact that it's one of the most divisive Spielberg movies. Tons of people laud this as an absolute masterpiece, but that's not necessarily the majority consensus. Others think it's okay, and some just outright hate it. What do I think of it? Well, there's not really much suspense given how far into the ranking we are, so you can probably tell that I'm pretty firmly in the masterpiece camp. I was kind of floored by this film. Not only in terms of how much it hooked me emotionally, but how it consistently went in new and entirely unexpected directions. And it all worked. There's a massive tonal shift after the first hour, and I honestly really dug it. That contrast made sense for the story that was being told, and the journey the protagonist had to go on. Hell, I didn't even know that this robot kid was the protagonist of the movie at first. Okay, let me back up. Basically, it's the future, and AI robots are now a part of human society. One family's kid is in cryostasis since he has a rare disease. So the dad is like, hey honey, let's adopt a robot boy. And while the mom is hesitant at first, she eventually starts warming up to him, while the dad gets more and more mistrusting of him. Ooh, I don't like that robot boy. He's looking pretty shifty. My brother in Christ, you bought the robot. Like this was your idea. Anyway, I had a pretty clear idea in my head of where the story was gonna go. Oh, the robot boy David is gonna turn evil and try and get revenge after the family doesn't want him anymore. I especially felt like it was gonna go this direction once their actual son came home. Yep, it's gonna be a creepy ass story about an AI that goes rogue in his pursuit of love, even though honestly, David did nothing wrong at this point in the movie. I didn't want him to turn evil and go against his mom. He was just a victim of his family not being able to accept him. And on some level, you can't really blame them. It's a strange situation. But I just wanted the best for David, and I braced myself for the inevitable rogue evil AI plotline. And then the movie didn't do that. Like, at all. It takes a hard left turn into David getting abandoned in the woods after his mom doesn't have the heart to have him incinerated. And from there, it becomes a fascinating retelling of the Pinocchio story. David journeys throughout all sorts of visually stimulating worlds, meets a plethora of kooky characters, and tries his hardest to track down the blue fairy that can turn him into a real boy so he can be with his mother again. Like, bro, are you kidding me? That's way more creative and way more devastating than the direction I thought this story was headed. The movie was telling me, yes, you were absolutely not wrong in rooting for David. He deserves the world, even though you know it's probably impossible for him to get what he wants. This movie is just devastating. On top of being inventive, gorgeous, ethereal, it's a pretty insane balancing act of all sorts of seemingly disconnected tones. Yet they all somehow mesh together into something unbelievably special. I haven't even mentioned the ending, which takes another hard left into territory I never would have expected the film to go into. But it somehow works! It doesn't seem outlandish for the universe of the film, and by God, did it leave me a sobbing mess. It's just an absolutely wonderful film from beginning to end. The cinematography is creative, particularly in the first hour before we know if we can trust David or not. The set design is immaculate, particularly from the second hour onward. And Haley Joel Osment gives probably the best child performance I've ever seen in anything. Like, so much of the movie hinges on the performance of this 12-year-old boy, and he knocks it out of the park. From the initial uncanniness to the brutal emotion when he's revealed to be the protagonist. If it seemed like I was clowning on him in my Disney sequel ranking, I wasn't. I was more so clowning on the fact that Disney just straight up didn't know other child actors existed since they kept casting him in everything. But you know what? After watching this movie, it's pretty obvious why. The kid has a gift. My only real issue with this film is that there's a random sex bot played by Jude Law that David befriends in the middle. And I'm sorry, I didn't really get what they were going for with this character. Like, he was fine, I didn't hate him or find him annoying. But I just feel like every aspect of him could have benefited from another draft. I don't really believe he's formed a bond with David. I don't really know why he was allowed to leave with him at the Flesh Fest. And I just generally think he was an unnecessary addition to the journey when David and Teddy making their way through all this together would have been more than enough. Plus, some parts of the journey feel a little quick. Like when this delightful Robin Williams Einstein hologram tells them they need to go to the flooded Manhattan. Oh, that sounds really treacherous. How are they gonna get there? Oh, the cops are outside with a helicopter, so David just gets in the helicopter, and then they ride the helicopter, and then 2 minutes later in movie, they're already at Manhattan. Yeah, felt a little abrupt, but that's not really a huge issue. Overall, this is a true masterclass collaboration between two legendary filmmakers. Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier if you're unaware, but this was Stanley Kubrick's project for a while that he couldn't quite figure out up until his death. So Steven Spielberg picked up where he left off and fleshed it out in rather unexpected ways. A ton of critics when this movie first came out assumed the colder, harder sci-fi stuff was Kubrick's doing, and that Spielberg was responsible for the sentimental schmaltz in the beginning and ending. But no, apparently the more emotional stuff was all Kubrick, and Spielberg was responsible for the darker elements. That's pretty fascinating and unexpected. All in all, the tonal disparity between parts of this movie really works, throwing you into David's shoes as he has the only person he loves ripped away from him, resulting in a desperate, nigh impossible feeling quest to get her back. It's a towering, heartbreaking film that displays the awesome talents of two unfathomably talented directors. Not every aspect of it works for me, but most of it works wonders. You need to seek this one out no matter what you've heard about it. It's truly special in every way.
Now I'm sick! See? You said that would happen. You are a precog!
Holy hell, Spielberg was cooking during the 2000s. I'd argue this is his most consistent decade, since apart from the unfortunate blunder that is Crystal Skull, everything he put out was a banger. Munich, War of the Worlds, AI, Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, which is a good movie, damn it, and the best out of all of these, Minority Report. I'm kinda shocked this movie hasn't caught on in larger pop culture, cause it's just a good as hell, high concept action sci-fi thriller that anyone can get into. I can just picture the corny trailer narration for it now. In a world where crimes are predicted and stopped before they happen, Tom Cruise is on the run for a crime he isn't going to commit. It's just a film filled to the brim with smart ideas, fascinating depictions of the future, exciting action, good comedic moments, just everything you could possibly want in a movie. It sets up a fascinating premise about cops who prevent crimes thanks to these three psychic kids who see them before they happen. The opening 15-minute sequence showing how all this works is harrowing, tense, and shot and edited in such deliberately disorienting ways, reflecting how bleak and morally gray this whole concept is. It's a great opener, but once it was done, I was like, okay movie, you really hooked me with the premise, but I sincerely hope the main plot can make effective use of this premise. And thankfully, I wasn't disappointed. The precogs predict Tom Cruise is gonna murder someone, and now he's on the run from his own comrades. A classic tale with an ingenious sci-fi twist. It makes for an absolutely captivating game of cat and mouse with so many surprises in store. The world is so creative, with cars that drive vertically, spider drones the police use, eyeball scanners all over the place, targeted ads that call you out by name. That sounds like hell, and yet I feel like we're actually gonna get there by the time 2054 rolls around. There are a ton of great details, like how there's a character named Leo Crow, and crows are the symbol of death. or how Tom Cruise lost his son while underwater, which mirrors how the precogs go underwater. There's probably some really cool symbolism to that parallel, but I don't have the time to unpack it. Have you seen the length of this video? Okay, here's some pretty easy symbolism. I like how all the precogs are named after famous murder mystery authors. Agatha for Agatha Christie, Arthur for Arthur Conan Doyle, and Dashiell, named after this other one I haven't heard of because I'm uncultured. But regardless, very cool detail. Speaking of murder mystery and Tom Cruise losing his son, this movie has a lot of similarities to the game Heavy Rain. You know, the one with Jason! So I guess if you ever wanted to see a version of Heavy Rain that's actually good, you can watch this! The lengths Tom Cruise has to go to avoid capture are pretty intense. And there were multiple sequences where my entire body was viscerally squirming in my seat. That damn scene with the spider drones, man. That shit really got me. But not as much as the scene where Tom Cruise finds the guy he's looking for. That's all I'm gonna say, because I don't want to spoil anything about it. But holy shit, that might be the most tense, edge-of-my-seat scene in any Spielberg movie. It was fucking insane. So well directed, and I had no idea what was gonna happen. Just unreal. It also plays really well into the movie's theme of free will versus predetermination. It maybe doesn't explore that theme as heavily as it could have, but it's got so many other things going for it that it hardly matters. Honestly, this movie was pretty close to perfect for a majority of its runtime, but I do think the pacing kind of falters a bit in the last 30 minutes or so. It has a pretty good twist, but not really enough time for it to flow naturally. There's a lot of events one after another leading up to the climax, and it kind of feels like the film got switched into maximum overdrive in order to get to this conclusion. I also have a small problem with this one scene that implies that Tom Cruise is gonna go blind, or at least half blind for the rest of the movie. I was like, oh shit, that really throws a wrench into his survival. But then he just moves on and I guess his vision is fine. I don't know if I missed something or what, but it feels like the movie kinda cops out of giving him vision impairment. Boo! Finally, there's a scene in a factory towards the middle of this where Tom Cruise has to dodge all these machines and he gets his hand stuck in one of those, and it's eerily similar to Attack of the Clones, which came out the exact same summer as this movie. Imagine that. It's almost like Spielberg and Lucas are friends or something. Anyway, I have to dock points from this movie for making me think about Attack of the Clones. I'm not actually docking points from the movie for that, I just thought it was funny. Speaking of funny, Tom Cruise calls Colin Farrell a twink in this movie. So yeah, this is easily one of Spielberg's best and most underrated films. It seems pretty well liked, but I'm shocked it isn't more talked about, and that more people don't recognize that it has some of the best scenes of his entire career. Chances are you've seen, or at least know about, the top 4 films on my list. So if you take anything away from my ranking, it's that you need to watch Minority Report. An absolute banger that I can't recommend enough.
Hello, Newman.
So, I feel like a lot of you might be dissatisfied with my placements of 3 of what I consider to be the big 4 Spielberg blockbusters. Jaws, E.T., and Raiders of the Lost Ark are probably placed a bit lower on my list than they are for most people. But I'm gonna try and make it up to you by saying that the last of the big 4 Spielberg blockbusters completely lives up to the hype for me. Welcome to Jurassic Park. The first time I watched this movie, I really liked it and thought it was great. But it wasn't until this rewatch when I realized, holy shit, this is kind of phenomenal in every way. Like, more than any other Spielberg movie, I'd argue that this is the one he directs the fuck out of the most. What do I mean by that? I mean there are so many insanely gripping sequences, so many great little details, meaningful and effective shots, just an unbelievable visual mastery over what every scene is trying to convey. And it's not just little moments that make this movie so excellent and so well directed. It's the overall massive tonal shift halfway through that serves as the main conceit of the film. It feels like the entire movie was tonally built around this one line.
That is one big pile of shit.
I think we have the wrong clip. Who's responsible for this? Randy, looking at you.
The entire movie was tonally built around this one line.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
An iconic line, no doubt. But I'd go a step further and argue that the whole film revolves around that one sentence. The first half of Jurassic Park is the whether or not they could section, where the characters and the audience are taken in by the whimsy and wonder of living, breathing dinosaurs. He did it. That crazy son of a bitch, he did it. I'm referring to Spielberg, by the way. This is some of the most revolutionary CG in the history of film. It blew audiences away in 1993, and a lot of it still holds up pretty well. A couple shots look iffy now, like, unfortunately, the very first dinosaur they encounter, and the running ones later. But most of the other ones, I mean, that's a damn real Triceratops. I refuse to believe otherwise. The effects are legendary and hold up shockingly well. Better than a lot of modern CG, that's for sure. And again, despite some of the concerns the main characters bring up, the first half of the movie is pretty magical. From the awe the characters experience, to the John Williams music, to the segment where a cutesy little DNA cartoon explains the cloning process to us, to the fact that the guy in charge of the park just looks like Santa Claus. Like, that was some really good casting, since it really makes you feel like this is a whimsical guy making dreams come true. Also, I wrote that line before I found out that he actually played Santa Claus in a movie the year after this came out. So that just supports my point even more. Everything seems perfect and magical, even though the main characters have a couple of doubts. Then, ever so slowly, those doubts start to get proven right as things go wrong. And this is where the didn't stop to think if they should aspect takes over the film. We've gone from something whimsical and kid-friendly to a straight-up horror movie. The build-up and payoff of the T-Rex are both sufficiently tense and scary. It feels like what Spielberg was trying to accomplish with Jaws all those years ago, but couldn't due to technical limitations. Even though I had seen this movie before, I was on the edge of my seat during that first T-Rex encounter. It's just unbelievable. Don't even get me started on the raptors. Like, when that bitch started opening a door handle, I just thought, oh, they're screwed. It's such an effective film when it comes to conveying danger, and it doesn't even need dinosaurs to do that. When Laura Dern was about to flip the switch and turn the electric fence on while the kid was on it, I was actively shouting, no, don't do it, at the screen. And then they actually electrocuted him. Like, this movie does not fuck around. But with that said, it has this goofy charm to it that it never loses, even as things get dire. Like when the lawyer is left alone on the toilet as the bathroom collapses around him, or when Newman shit talks the dinosaur to its face, or just everything that comes out of Jeff Goldblum's mouth in this movie. It's comedy gold. And on top of it being thrilling and fun, it's also got so much to say about the morals and ethics of bringing dinosaurs back. It's fascinating to see these scientists philosophize over these creatures and determine that it might not be okay for a species that had its shot to suddenly come back. It's fascinating to see Hammond watch every conceivable thing go wrong and say, oh well, next time I'll get this idea right. His conversation with Laura Dern in this Rainforest Cafe ass looking place is so interesting. I like how Alan has an arc about learning to take care of kids, but they don't beat you over the head with it. The kids don't suddenly call him dad or anything. It's just a nice background element that happens naturally as they try to survive Jurassic Park. Speaking of the kids, my initial problem on my first viewing was that I found them kind of annoying. But I don't know, they're actually not that bad, and seeing them in danger so often adds a lot of stakes to the story. And I kinda wish Jeff Goldblum was in it a tiny bit more, since he has more Riz in this movie than any man who has ever lived. I mean, aside from Newman. But however, I guess I should count myself lucky he wasn't in it that much, because we've seen how that goes. Oh well, despite these very minor gripes, this is kind of the perfect blockbuster, if we're being honest. It gives you everything you could possibly want out of a movie. Excitement, suspense, humor, and meaningful commentary on the ethics of some scientific endeavors. It contains a heaping helping of both style and substance, marrying an ingenious script with iconic performances and stellar, committed direction. It's baffling to me that this is the only one of the big four Spielberg blockbusters to not receive a Best Picture nomination. I mean, I totally understand Jaws and Raiders getting nominated, but like, E.T.? Really? But to be fair, that's probably because the Academy was preoccupied with a different Spielberg movie that released in 1993. And also their opinions don't matter, so who cares? Jurassic Park is a towering cinematic achievement. And they should have just stopped at one of these movies. But oh well.
I just want to stand over the corpses of 6 fallen heroes drinking ginger ale from a goblet touched by the blood of Christ.
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is my favorite Indiana Jones movie of all time. And it's my favorite adventure movie of all time. And it's my favorite Spielberg movie of all time. We're once again doing that thing where the top 2 movies are better overall in my opinion, but this is my favorite. The one that I'm the most obsessed with and could rewatch any day of the week. It's just so strong, taking all of the thrills, mystery, and excitement that Raiders had, and injecting it with a really compelling central dynamic between Indy and his dad. Plus, the villains are better, the set pieces are stronger, it's incredibly funny without sacrificing dramatic tension. Honestly, as strong of a film as Raiders is, I don't really find myself going back to it that much, because this movie is Raiders but better to me. I know that's probably a controversial opinion, and to be fair, Raiders does have bigger scope, and a more compelling and awe-inspiring artifact. You also can't beat its climax. But, I don't know, Last Crusade is still better, sue me. While the opening young Indy sequence isn't as good as Raiders opening, it is an incredibly fun and exciting way to show us the origin of our favorite whip-toting hero. Yeah, it's obviously a bit ridiculous that he gets his whip, his hat, and his fear of snakes all from the same adventure. But you know what? I like it. It's cute. It also foreshadows his dad's obsession with the Grail, and it contains my absolute favorite edit / pair of shots in Spielberg's entire filmography. When the bad guy puts his fedora on Indy's head, lowering it in the process, and then it cuts to adult Indy raising his head, all as his iconic theme plays. To me, that's cinema. That is the defining moment of the Indiana Jones series, and my favorite Spielberg scene ever. And this is just the first 10 minutes of the movie. From there, we embark on this rollicking, well-paced adventure with a perfect mix of puzzle solving, action, and character building. The race to decipher the clues to the Grail's hiding place is riveting. The sheer variety in the set pieces, from boat battles, car chases, plane dogfights, and the thrilling desert tank battle, is awesome. And the simple beauty of seeing a father and son reconnect and repair their tumultuous relationship is beautiful. This is the first Indiana Jones film to really flesh out Indiana Jones himself. He's cool in the first two movies, but not really much more to me. It's here where we get to see his personal frustrations, his vulnerabilities, his backstory, and all of this is done without diminishing his coolness factor. Much like Raiders with its truck chase scene, he basically single-handedly takes down the Nazis and their tank, and it's awe-inspiring. However, I should probably address 3 pesky little words I just said. Much like Raiders. One of the biggest criticisms I can muster for this movie is that it sticks just a little bit too close to the same formula as Raiders. It's yet another race against the Nazis for a biblical artifact with mystical powers, featuring a vehicle battle in the desert. It's pretty obvious that Spielberg's dissatisfaction with Temple of Doom, not to mention a lot of the audience's dissatisfaction, made him want to course correct and bring the series back to what worked about Raiders. So ultimately, while it's kind of a shame the movie we got isn't more ambitious, especially considering this is the last good Indiana Jones movie we would ever get, I don't mind the similarities too much because this does feel like its own distinct story, owed in large part to the differing action set pieces and especially the unique characters. The double whammy twist villain reveal a third of the way through the movie is great, not only giving these characters a lot of time to be evil, but also suiting this pulpy adventure story really well. It's cool to subvert the typical love interest trope we've gotten used to over the past 2 films, and it's also nice that Elsa isn't one-dimensionally evil, feeling shame over working with the Nazis, and even tricking Donovan into drinking the fake-ass Grail. As a kid, I always thought she was just stupid and she didn't know what the Grail looks like, but nowadays, it's pretty clear she did and just wanted his ass gone. That's a power move. With that said, yeah, she still willingly worked with the Nazis, so bye bitch, you won't be missed. I also really love Marcus Brody in this movie. Just having this bumbling old buffoon along for the ride leads to such amazing comedic moments along the way. I've heard that there are some people who dislike this movie for ruining his character. Which, like, oh yeah, he had such a rich character in his 5 minutes of screen time in Raiders. Oh, but he said in Raiders he would have gone after the Ark himself a few years ago. So this movie presenting him as a bumbling idiot is a retcon. No, it isn't. He can act bold and blusterous and still be an idiot. I know that because he does it in this movie.
Follow me! I know the way!
Truth be told, I've only ever seen tweets talking about these Marcus Brody stans who hate Last Crusade for ruining his character. I've never actually encountered one of these people myself, so who knows, maybe they don't exist. But if they do, I just owned them with facts and logic. Anyway though, Brody's great, but he does kind of play into my second nitpick with this movie. While this is definitely the funniest Indiana Jones movie, like by far, maybe it's a little too funny sometimes. It really goes heavy on the jokes and takes itself a lot less seriously than, say, Raiders. Don't get me wrong, every scene that's meant to be dramatic still is. There's no tonal issues or anything. But once we get to Brody exclaiming, "Oh, look, Henry, the pen is mightier than the sword," it's like, okay, movie, you're pushing it a little bit. I think that's enough silliness. Go lie down now. But again, this is a pretty minor problem for me because 95% of the jokes and gags in this film hit bullseyes. It is just so off the wall and loony in the best possible way. And a lot of that comes from one of the best characters in the whole series, Henry Jones Sr. Casting the original James Bond, Sean Connery, as a doddering old man who constantly needs to be saved was a stroke of hilarity. He has a bunch of super funny moments throughout the film, but there's also a lot of heart to his character as well. He wasn't a great father, but it becomes evident that this adventure is bringing him and Indy closer together. And for a man who spent his entire life searching for the Grail to just tell Indy, let it go, because he values their lives over his treasure, now that's true illumination right there. Oh geez, I haven't even mentioned the Grail Knight and how cool of a concept he is, or how the lighting on him is significantly different from the other characters to signify that he's a man out of time. Or the scene where they run into Hitler, who takes the Grail diary he's been looking for, then just signs it and gives it back, completely oblivious. Always a pleasure to watch Spielberg take shots at Nazis. There's about a million other things I could say about why I love this movie so much, but I think you get the picture. This is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's the reason I'm so in love with the Indiana Jones series. It's kinda weird to call myself a fan, considering I only really like 2 of the 5 movies, but like I said, I'm also a Star Wars fan, so I'm used to the ratio being off. Either way, I can't sing the praises of Last Crusade enough. If you've never seen any of these movies and you want to get into the franchise, I mean, start with Raiders, obviously. It would be silly to say otherwise. But if you end up not really liking Raiders that much and you assume this franchise just isn't for you, maybe give Temple of Doom a try, because it is radically different and you might enjoy that one a lot more. But if you also don't like that one, which is way more understandable than not liking Raiders, then you should definitely give Last Crusade a try. It might give you a lot of the heart and humanity that isn't quite as prevalent in Raiders, so you might just get something out of this franchise yet. And if you somehow don't like all 3 of these, okay, that's fine, you can stop now. This series is absolutely not your thing. Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny are not gonna sway you if the original trilogy doesn't.
And in that Midas, they decided to play Saving Private Ryan at full volume.
Once again, if there's one thing I'm exceptionally tired of, it's Oscar-nominated war movies. They're almost always well made from a technical standpoint, but like, good lord, I get it. War is hell. It sucks. It's bad. The end. They certainly have their audience, but every time award season rolls around and I try watching all the nominated movies, it's just like, oh, we're doing one of these again? Okay. I just can't stress enough how much these movies just aren't for me. With that said, Saving Private Ryan is one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. I don't know, man. To me, this is just the quintessential example of what a war movie can accomplish, showcasing the unflinching reality of how horrific and visceral combat is, while also displaying a uniquely human sensibility. You get attached to Tom Hanks and his band of troops as they try and carry out their mission that, despite the noble intentions it has for this one mother, might not seem worth the potential lives of 8 other people. Like, yeah, we gotta save Matt Damon, but is it really worth losing Vin Diesel over? Who's gonna perform cool car stunts and teach us the value of family? It's kind of a difficult and complex situation to swallow, but orders are orders after all. One aspect of the film I really find fascinating is the fact that the opening 30-minute D-Day sequence isn't actually related to the whole Saving Private Ryan plotline. Story-wise, you could start the movie with Normandy already stormed. Like, if you look at the Wikipedia synopsis of the film, the entire 30-minute opening is summarized in just the first sentence. But with that said, this movie would not be the same without it. First of all, because it's the best scene in the damn movie, and one of the best action scenes I've seen in any movie. Grippingly staged, impeccably shot, with just so much gore that adds some real texture to the scene. I was glued to my seat the entire time, and only once Tom Hanks started drinking his water did I let out one of the deepest exhales of my entire life. This sequence really blew me away. But aside from it just being an amazing scene, it's unremovable because it casts such a large shadow over the rest of the film. We've been shown how brutal this war is, so now we really don't want to see our boys get eviscerated as they begin this hopeless seeming quest to locate Ryan. The dark and disturbing tone of the war has been set perfectly by the opening, and as a result, I couldn't look away from anything happening in the following 2.5-ish hours. But credit where credit's due. The rest of the movie after the D-Day scene is also damn fantastic. Perfectly paced, with the right amount of tense action broken up by quiet character building scenes. Tom Hanks' character is very sympathetic, but I think the character I was most invested in was Upham. He reminded me a lot of Melchi from Andor. I just generally really like it when silly little guys are thrust into combat scenarios where they're pretty out of their element, and I was really invested in whether he'd be okay or not. I also really like the scenes he has in the final act. Finally, Bryan Cranston is in this movie. That's funny. I always like seeing him pop up in pre-Malcolm in the Middle stuff. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I just think this is an absolutely exceptional movie, and I don't really have anything to critique. I've seen a lot of arguments that this is an American propaganda piece, but like, I don't know, it's a movie about World War II. I think if there's any time in history to root for America, it's when their opponent was literally Hitler. Besides, this really isn't a movie about America or nationalism or anything like that. Believe me, I don't even like America very much, and yet I found this movie to be unbelievably gripping, powerful, visceral, and undoubtedly the best war film I've ever seen. Spielberg's level of skill with a variety of genres is simply astounding, and this is easily one of his greatest achievements to date. It would be his greatest film ever, and yet there's one other that tops it. This is one of those rankings where the #1 spot was clear from the start. Schindler's List is arguably Steven Spielberg's most acclaimed film of all time, garnering countless accolades and even being his only film to win Best Picture. Very fitting, since it also happens to be his best picture. While he's made plenty of masterpieces across a variety of genres, this is the sort of film you would never imagine he had in him. Unflinchingly brutal and dramatic, filled with endless despair and sorrow. It's compelling to watch a man go from a selfish capitalist to a heroic figure who can no longer ignore the suffering around him. But it's hard to be inspired due to the abject hopelessness and horror of the film's subject matter. The lives Schindler saved are precious, and they make for an unfathomably powerful ending sequence. But the truly terrible loss of so many other lives, brought about by the greatest force of evil on the planet, is impossible to ignore. I don't really think I can say much more on this film, for obvious reasons. To summarize, the performances are excellent. It remains gripping and compelling throughout its entire 3+ hour runtime. The black and white cinematography is uniquely stunning. And unlike The Color Purple, where Steven Spielberg felt like the wrong choice to portray the struggles of these people, here it's abundantly clear that this was his story to tell. It's stunning to see him treat the story with such severity after he made those campy adventure serials that took the piss out of Nazis, one of which having come out a mere 4 years before this film. This is what I mean when I say that I didn't know he had something like this in him. Truly remarkable beyond belief. There's only one slight issue I take with an otherwise perfect film, and that's the shower scene. This stuck out to me as a somewhat odd, triumphant, hopeful moment that didn't mesh with how despair-filled the rest of the film was. It felt like Spielberg reverting to his old crowd-pleasing ways for a brief moment. But ultimately, it comes after nearly 3 hours of darkness and despair appropriate to the setting. It doesn't undo how effectively dramatic the rest of the film is. And maybe it's what a lot of people needed. A slight reprieve from the descent into hell this movie takes you on. Regardless, this is easily the greatest film ever made by Steven Spielberg. It isn't even close. No other movie in his insanely prestigious and iconic filmography can reach the heights of the power and mastery of Schindler's List. How did this come out the same year as Jurassic Park? How do you make both of these at the same time? Truly insane. So, that's the list. And honestly, This is some of the most fun I've ever had making a ranking video. Watching these films that span so many genres, so many styles, so many eras. I really can't stress enough the sheer amount of cinema I experienced throughout the making of this video. I would highly recommend checking out some of the movies I talked about if you haven't seen them. Like, stuff like Minority Report, AI, The Terminal, Tintin, etc. really deserves your attention. Or, if you somehow missed out on bona fide classics like Jaws, Jurassic Park, or the Indiana Jones movies, just give any of these a watch. Spielberg's filmography is a great gateway to richer and more ambitious films that I hope you continue to pursue after checking some of these out. Like, no offense, but if you're one of those people that unironically asks me to review the Paw Patrol movie, then clearly you need some real movies in your life. Anyway, let me know what director filmographies you guys would be interested in seeing me check out next. I was thinking I could probably do Christopher Nolan since he has an equal amount of prestige and commercial success, Robert Zemeckis since he has an equal amount of classics and absolute fucking garbage, or maybe M. Night Shyamalan since that could be more painful than the Illumination ranking. The possibilities are endless. Until next time, good night, Tri-State area.